Hello everyone, welcome to Enigma Vault. I hope my voice and stories can be the bridge between your racing thoughts and peaceful sleep. If this journey can soothe you, please like and subscribe to my channel. You are safe here. Let the story begin. I was awakened by the vibration of my cell phone. My temples felt like they were being hammered by a rusty chisel, and my throat felt the sour bitterness of stale whiskey. I groped for the bedside table in a daze, and my fingertips touched a sticky wine stain. It was the bourbon bottle that was broken last night. The amber liquid had long since seeped into the cheap wooden board, and was now mixing with the smell of sweat and mildew on my body, fermenting in this shabby apartment of less than 30 square meters. The phone was still vibrating, the screen blindingly bright. I squinted my eyes and looked at the caller ID. The words Grey Harbor Town Police Station were like a needle piercing my nerves. Evan Hastings. My voice was as hoarse as sandpaper when the call was connected. You guys aren't going to ask me to draw a drunk portrait again? Last time you found the wallet of old Jack in the freezer of a convenience store when he said he saw a flying elk. I'm Leah Crawford, the new sheriff. The female voice was like an ice pick piercing through the thick fog, with textbook clarity. This is the third body. The cause of death is highly similar to the murder case 20 years ago. My grip on the phone suddenly tightened. 20 years ago. This word is like an old phonograph, clicking and playing dusty memories. On a rainy night, the sound of sirens tore through the silence of Grey Harbor Town. I huddled in the closet and saw through the crack that my mother was lying in a pool of blood. Her hand was stretched out towards me, with unfinished bloody words on her fingertips. It was the night of my 7th birthday, and I was the only survivor of the Hastings family massacre. What did you say? My voice trembled. Abandoned sugar factory. Back alley warehouse. Leah's tone was flat. The deceased had 13 stab wounds on his chest, and a broken little finger on his right hand. It seemed that he had grabbed something before he died. I know why you left the FBI, but now, 10 minutes. I hung up the phone in such a hurry that I knocked over a chair. When I was putting on my coat, I felt a metal box in my inside pocket. Inside was antidepressants and a yellowed photo. My mother was holding me when I was 3 years old, with the big chimney of the sugar factory in the background. At that time it was still emitting white smoke. Unlike the rusty skeleton it is now, the wind from Grey Harbor Town blew into the car windows, carrying the smell of rust. There was a hole in the wire fence of the sugar factory. I bent down and crawled in, and my heels crushed the glass shards all over the ground. The warehouse door was half open, and the smell of blood came out first, like an invisible snake wrapped around the throat. Leah stood next to the body, the sleeves of her police uniform rolled up to her forearms, her white gloves stained with blood. She was thinner than in the photo, with a jawline like a knife. She raised an eyebrow when she saw me. 3 minutes earlier than expected. The former profiler still has a sense of time. The body was lying on the ground. The blood on the back of the neck had coagulated into a dark brown color. I squatted down and gently turned over the dead man's face with my gloved hands. He was a middle-aged man, with a butterfly-shaped birthmark on his left cheek, which overlapped with the description of an eyewitness in the archives from 20 years ago. His right hand was strangely twisted. His little finger joint was swollen like a purple grape, and there were some dark brown fibers stuck in the cracks of his nails. 13 stab wounds. Leah squatted down and picked up something from the dead man's fingernails with an evidence bag. Each stab wound was made 2 seconds apart. This is the same frequency as the stab wounds in your mother's case. 20 years ago. My throat tightened. That year, I hid in the closet and heard this sound, the dull thud of metal piercing flesh. Every 2 seconds, like some kind of morbid metronome. He was trying to grab something before he died. I pointed at the dead man's twisted hand. It might be something from the murderer. Leah handed me a photo of the scene. The first 2 bodies, one is a retired sheriff, and the other is a former forensic assistant. Her voice was lowered. They are both related to the murder case. I suddenly felt cold. The hair on the back of my neck stood up, as if someone was breathing into my ear. I need to use my ability. I was shocked when I said this. Are you sure? Leah's pupils shrank. The last time you used Whisper of the Dead, you aged 10 years in 3 days. I didn't answer. I pressed my fingers on the dead man's eyelids and found that his skin was still warm. The murderer had been gone for no more than 2 hours. In the last 30 seconds before closing my eyes, the memories of the deceased will replay in my mind like a videotape, but at a cost. There was a sudden explosion of pain in my temple. Spots of light flashed in the darkness. I saw the old clock at the sugar factory, and the hand stopped at 2:17 in the morning. The deceased, his name was Roy Carter, the owner of a car repair shop in the east of the town, was smoking with his back to the warehouse door, with sparks flickering between his fingers. Then the door was kicked open, and a man in a black raincoat rushed in, holding a serrated knife in his right hand, and Roy's terrified face was reflected on the blade. You shouldn't bring up the past. The voice was processed through a voice changer, and sounded like the friction of rusty gears. Roy turned and tried to run, but was kicked to the ground. The knife flashed up and down 13 times. When the last knife stabbed into the chest, Roy's hand grabbed the murderer's wrist, and the fibers between his fingernails were the material of the raincoat. Then his eyes fell on the back of the murderer's hand. There was a blue-gray tattoo there, a twisted mandala with chains wrapped around the petals. The memory suddenly broke. I stumbled backwards, bumping into the shelves. I didn't even feel the mirror fragments piercing my back. I just felt the skin on my face falling down, and I touched my chin, and the stubble was as hard as a wire brush. Evan, Leah supported me, and I saw the shock in her eyes. In the mirror, my eyes were full of wrinkles, and most of the hair on my temples was white. The murderer has a mandala tattoo on the back of his hand. I gasped, took out a pen from my pocket, and drew on the back of the evidence bag. Raincoat material, polyester fiber with dark patterns. Let's go to the hospital first. There was a crack in Leah's voice. Your cell aging speed has accelerated by at least 20 years. No need. I pulled off her gloves and pressed them on my face. I feel like I can still hold on. In fact, my knees were shaking, and every breath felt like sandpaper rubbing against my lungs. The sound of sirens came from far away. 3 men in police uniforms rushed in, led by Barney Hawk, the old sheriff's son, who had been a trainee when I left the department. He stared at me, his eyes like poison. Hastings, your fingerprints were found at the scene.
Impossible. Leah stood in front of me. He's only been here 10 minutes.
Barney threw a fingerprint comparison sheet at me and projected it on the phone screen. The fingerprint on the inside of the warehouse iron door completely overlapped with the one I had filed with the police 3 years ago. Someone used your fingerprint to make a mold. I stared at the fingerprint and suddenly remembered that, before I passed out from drunkenness last night, a man in a black coat knocked on my apartment door. Come back to the police station with us. Barney took out handcuffs. You are a major suspect in a serial murder case. If you resist arrest, wait until I finish investigating this case. I grabbed his wrist, and his wrist bone hurt. The man who killed my whole family 20 years ago is now cleaning up the people who knew about it. Barney's hand paused. His father was the sheriff who handled the case at the time, and his throat was slit in his garage last month. 2 hours at most, Leah suddenly said. I'll vouch for it as sheriff. Barney sneered. Sheriff Crawford, you'd better pray that he is not the murderer. When he slammed the door and went out, the wind lifted the corner of the dead man's clothes. I saw a pale blue mark on the inside of the deceased's ankle, exactly the same mark I had seen on my mother's ankle in my childhood, but a terror with petals wrapped around chains. The clock in the warehouse started moving, and the hands pointed to 3 o'clock and 7 minutes. I felt a sudden sharp pain on the back of my right hand. I lifted up my sleeve and saw light blue lines under my skin. They completely matched the marks on the deceased's ankle and the tattoo on the murderer's hand. When the handcuffs were fastened around my wrists, the coldness of the metal penetrated through my blood vessels and into my bones. Barney put his hand on the back of my neck and pushed me toward the police car, his rubber-soled shoes making a harsh sound on the concrete floor of the warehouse. Out of the corner of my eye, I saw Leah standing in the doorway, the police badge gleaming dully on the second button of her shirt, a relic of her father, whose photo I had seen in her office last week. "Mr. Hastings, please cooperate." Barney's voice was like sandpaper scraping against a rusty gun barrel. He deliberately emphasized the word "sir." 20 years ago, when his father carried me out of the fire, Sheriff Marlowe would squat down and stuff chocolate into my mouth. Now his son's knuckles were pressing against my spine, a reminder with every step. The police in Grey Harbor Town never believed in old friends. The leather cover on the back seat of the police car was torn and the thread pricked the back of my hand. I stared at my own reflection in the car window. The wrinkles at the corners of my eyes suddenly deepened, as if they had been carved by a knife. Last night, when I used Whisper of the Dead, I squatted in the warehouse for 17 minutes. According to the old rules, every 10 minutes will reduce 2 hours of life. Now the light blue lines on the back of my right hand are crawling along the veins up to my forearm, and it feels like earthworms wriggling under the skin. "What are you looking at?" Barney glared at me in the rearview mirror, a fresh scratch on his Adam's apple. "You'd better hope that the fingerprint mold thing can be cleared up." He turned the key, and the engine roared like an asthmatic. I thought of the mandala on the deceased's ankle, overlapping with a faint mark under my mother's nightgown that was wet by firewater before she died. The fire was so big that night that I hid in the closet. I only saw my mother pushing me to the deepest part. The chain tattoo on her ankle rubbed against my face, with the scent of lavender. The police station's old air conditioner coughed against the ceiling. Doris, the old police officer at the front desk, shook her head at me. Her daughter was my high school classmate and was dismembered at the dock last year. The murderer has not been caught yet. When Barney pushed me into the interrogation room, the creaking sound of the door hinges made my temples throb, as if someone was tapping my skull with fingernails. Name, Barney threw the folder on the table. The cover was printed with Serial Murder Case 0731, and the edges were curled up as if it had been soaked in water, and then dried. Evan Hastings. I licked my dry lips, my handcuffs tapping against the table. Former FBI profiler. Number. Don't talk about this. He pulled out a fingerprint comparison report and slapped it in front of me. The smell of ink made me dizzy. The door handle of the deceased in the warehouse and the handle of the murder weapon are all covered with your fingerprints. Explain. I stared at the red 99.7% match rate on the report. My throat tightened. Someone forged it with a mold. At 11 o'clock last night, a man in a black coat knocked on my apartment door. I opened a bottle of bourbon and woke up at 3 o'clock in the morning. The fingerprint film on the bedside table was gone. It's a very neat braid. Barney loosened his tie, revealing a cross necklace on his collarbone. Then how do you explain the skin tissue under the dead man's fingernails? The DNA comparison results will be available in 2 hours. If there is a match. I looked up suddenly. Was the deceased strangled to death? His pen paused. I used Whisper of the Dead in the warehouse. I stared at the hesitation in his pupils, her memory of the last 30 seconds before her death. The murderer put a nylon rope around her neck from behind, and she grabbed the murderer's wrists when she struggled. If the skin tissue was mine, then the killer was wearing human leather gloves, the same ones used to create the fake fingerprints. Barney's pen rolled to the corner of the table, making a crisp sound. He stood up suddenly, and the chair left a harsh mark on the ground. Do you think I'm a fresh graduate? What kind of nonsense is this about mind reading? When your father died, the garage surveillance camera couldn't capture the murderer. I interrupted him. Sheriff Marlowe had his throat slit at 3 a.m. on the 17th of last month. There were no signs of a struggle at the scene. And he didn't even have time to draw his gun, because the murderer was someone he knew, and he might have said something to make him let down his guard, like about a case from 20 years ago. Barney's face turned pale. His hand was on his gun. His knuckles were blue. "You fucking..." Knock knock. The door opened and Leah poked her head in. Her police hat was tilted half an inch, and the ends of her hair were covered with warehouse dust. "Barney, Mark has a new discovery." Assistant Medical Examiner Mark Harper stood behind her, holding a metal tray, his glasses fogged up. When he put the tray on the table, I saw a dark red tissue inside with fine sutures on the surface. The deceased's left kidney. Mark pushed up his glasses, his voice trembling. "The capsule has scars from a transplant operation, which was done at least 5 years ago. The donor information was completely deleted from the medical system, and even the pathology number was forged." Leah tapped her fingers on the edge of the tray. "In the past 10 years, Gray Harbor has only recorded 3 organ transplants funded by the Victor Marlowe Foundation." I stared at the kidney and suddenly remembered what Victor Marlowe said at the charity dinner last week, holding up a champagne glass. "The continuation of life is the most gentle resistance to death." There was a lighter patch of skin on the inside of his wrist, as if a bandage had just been removed. Barney's Adam's apple moved, and he grabbed the pathology report on the tray. "What does this have to do with Hastings? If the deceased was an organ transplant recipient, then her identity may have been tampered with." I leaned forward, the handcuffs pulling my wrist sore. The murderer is not only cleaning up the insiders, but also cleaning up the nodes in the transplant chain. 20 years ago, my family was murdered. My mother was a nurse in the organ transplant department. She was following up on a heart transplant operation. "That's enough." Leah suddenly pressed the back of my hand. Her hand was very cold, as if she had just touched the metal table in the morgue. "Barney, give me 3 hours. If I can't find a doctor, I'll handcuff you myself." Barney stared at her badge for 10 seconds, then suddenly grabbed his coat and threw it over the back of the chair. "Bring him back before 3 o'clock, or I'll apply for a citywide wanted notice." The smell of disinfectant in the hospital is more pungent than the musty smell in the police station. Leah parked the car behind the emergency room building, away from the surveillance cameras. And as we walked through the corridor, her leather heels tapped on the tiles, and every step seemed like a countdown. The doctor in charge of the Victor Foundation's transplants is Dr. Carl Hoffman. She flipped through her phone, the screen lighting up her eyes. He also performed a liver transplant on a town councilman 3 months ago. He was supposed to be in the clinic today. Hoffman's office is at the end of the 3rd floor. The door was not locked. When I pushed it open, I saw the coffee cup upside down on the corner of the table. The dark brown liquid spread on the annals of surgery like a rotten flower. The computer was on, and on the screen was an unsaved document titled, "Unusual Report on Donor." Someone pulled his white coat. I pointed to the wrinkles on the back of the chair. He tore off his badge while struggling. There was a silver brooch in the corner of the wall, the Masonic symbol that Hoffman often wore, now leaning next to the trash can. Leah squatted down to check the trash can, and took out a crumpled note with half a line of words on it. "Mendrake, Shane, Hastings." The ink was smudged on some of the words, as if it had been soaked in water. "The monitoring room is on the 1st floor." She put the note in her pocket. "I'll go check the video." I'm looking for the nurse's station." When I turned around, the lines on the back of my right hand suddenly felt extremely painful, as if someone was carving them with a red-hot needle. The emergency exit indicator light at the end of the corridor flashed, and in the red light I saw a shadow on the wall. A figure paused for a moment at the door of the stairwell, wearing black gloves, with half of a silver chain tattoo exposed on his wrist. When I rushed over, there was only a damp and musty smell in the stairwell. The fire door was ajar, and there was half a shoe print on the steps. It was a size 42 Martin boot, which was consistent with the fibers extracted from the fingernails of the deceased in the warehouse.
Evan,
Leah's voice came from the corridor. The surveillance shows that Hoffman was taken away by a man in a black coat at 2:15 and taken to the underground garage. I touched the note in my pocket. The edge of the paper still had Hoffman's body temperature. The whimpering of wind came from the vents of the underground garage, just like my mother's last unspoken cry of run in the fire 20 years ago. Leah's cell phone suddenly rang. She picked up the call, and her face instantly darkened.
Morgue.
Okay, I'll be there right away. She hung up the phone and stared at me. Doris said that the DNA results of the warehouse victims are in. The skin tissue belonged to Victor Marlowe. The fluorescent lights in the basement garage flickered overhead. I looked at the shadow behind Leah, where there was a pair of eyes watching us. It was not my illusion. The dark shadow moved and disappeared behind the pillar of area beef.
Let's go. Leah tugged at my sleeve. There's new information in the morgue.
I followed her to the elevator, and the lines on the back of my right hand had already reached my elbow. When the elevator door opened, our shadows were reflected on the mirrored wall. My temples had turned white without me noticing, and on the back of Leah's neck, a light blue mandala was emerging under her skin, with petals wrapped in chains, completely overlapping the mark on the deceased's ankle and the lines on the back of my hand. As I followed Leah into the morgue, the smell of disinfectant was creeping up my throat along my back teeth. Doris stood in front of the freezer, wrapped in a white coat. The metal drawer was half open, revealing the dead person's blue-gray ankles. The mandala, wrapped with chains, was now glowing the same light blue color as the back of Leah's neck, like a ball of will-o'-the-wisp frozen in the skin. The DNA comparison results show that the skin tissue under the nails of the deceased belongs to Victor Marlowe. Doris pushed her glasses and poked her fingertips on the test report. But what's even more strange is, she lifted the white cloth covering the deceased, and my stomach suddenly twitched. The skin on the deceased's chest was peeled off in one piece, revealing the dark red muscle tissue underneath, and there were fine serrated lines on the edge of the incision. This is not caused by an ordinary knife. It looks more like a skin removal knife for transplant surgery. Leah's fingers quickly flipped through the pages of her phone. I checked Victor's charity foundation. In the past 3 years, it has performed 12 organ transplants in Gray Harbor Town. The recipients were all homeless people with no relatives or friends. When she looked up, the mandala on the back of her neck trembled slightly as she swallowed, and the deceased. She clicked on a photo of a middle-aged man in work clothes. His name is Watson. He just applied for a kidney transplant from the foundation last week. The morgue's air cooler suddenly began to hum. I touched my aching temple. The lines on the back of my right hand had already crawled up to my forearm, like a snake shedding its skin. Go to the hospital. I pulled at my collar. Watson's wife might know something. The fluorescent lights in the hospital corridor stretched people's shadows out. As we turned the corner, we heard a heated argument outside the emergency room door. The woman in the pink sweater grabbed the nurse's sleeve. The tears in the corners of her eyes blurred her mascara into 2 blobs of ink, and she held a huddled boy in her arms. My husband couldn't have committed suicide. He said he would watch little Jack go to elementary school.
Aaron Watson?
Leah showed her police badge. The woman turned her head suddenly. The blood shot in her pupils, like a net. Have you found the person who killed my husband? The boy in her arms suddenly burst into tears. She hurriedly tried to comfort him, and a crumpled flyer fell out of her pocket. Gray Harbor Hope Foundation. Your kindness will prolong life. Signed by Victor Marlowe. Watson has been saying lately that the people at the foundation have been very kind to him. Irene sniffed, twisting the edge of the flyer with her fingers. Last week he told me secretly that Mr. Marlowe agreed to give him a brand new kidney, and also said— She suddenly lowered her voice. He also said that after the operation is done he will take Jack and me away from Gray Harbor and go to Florida to see the sea. Florida. My throat tightened. 20 years ago, my mother also said that she would take me to Florida to see the sea. When the fire burned half of the street, she pushed me out of the window with the plane ticket that she had not booked in time in her hand. Did he say anything about the anomalies of the Foundation? Leah asked quietly. Irene bit her lip and nodded. He has a recording saved in his phone. She pulled out an old smartphone with a cracked screen. Last night he was drunk and said, "Those people lying in the freezer, their eyes are still watching." I recorded it when I grabbed it. The recording first had an electric sound, followed by Watson's rapid breathing. "They're in the basement." Marlowe said it was a charity warehouse. "No, don't come over here." Then there was the dull thud of a heavy object falling to the ground, and a deep male voice. "You shouldn't touch things that don't belong to you." This recording was made 3 days ago. Erin dug her nails into her palms. That was the day he started to act strange. Leah's cell phone vibrated at this moment. She glanced at the screen and her face suddenly changed. Foundation surveillance shows that Watson was last seen in Marlowe's private warehouse, the same warehouse where the body was found. I stared at the boy sleeping in Irene's arms. There was a blue mark on his little finger, like a faded flower. "Let's go to the Foundation." I touched the notepaper in my pocket. Hoffman's body temperature was gone long ago, leaving only the rustling sound of the paper rubbing against each other. The glass door of the Hope Foundation reflects the sunset, coated with a layer of hypocritical gold. The receptionist came up to them with a smile. "Do you need any help?" The moment Leah showed her police badge, her smile froze on her face, and her finger secretly pressed the alarm under the table. "Don't bother." I tugged at my tie and headed for the stairwell. "We can take a look around on our own." The door lock of the office on the second floor was made of old-fashioned copper, and I opened it with a credit card. The filing cabinet was filled with recipient files, and the bottom drawer was locked with a combination lock. But when I felt the scratches on the edge of the keyhole, I suddenly remembered that there was the same patina between the fingernails on Hoffman's body. 1987 7-5. Wife, Ta. Leah stood by the window, the sunset making the mandala on the back of her neck translucent. It's the anniversary of Marlowe's wife's death. He mentioned it at the charity dinner. The moment the drawer opened, I heard my own heartbeat. A stack of yellowed surgical records was spread out in front of me. The donor column on each page had anonymous written on it, and the recipient column. I turned to the last page, and blood rushed to my head. The latest recipient registration had my name on it. "Evan?" Leah's voice came from behind. I turned around suddenly, and saw her staring at the photo on the wall. Marlowe was hugging a woman in a white dress, with an identical mandala on the back of the woman's neck, chains wrapped around her wrists, the marks on the dead man's ankles, and the lines on the back of my hand, like 3 parallel snakes. Suddenly there was a sound of breaking glass downstairs. I pulled Leah behind the curtains, and saw 3 men in black suits rushing in. The tattoos on their wrists were patterns of mandalas wrapped around chains. "Catch them," the leading man shouted. Leah picked up the paperweight on the table and smashed it against the window. I pulled her down in the rain of broken glass. As the wind blew into her collar, I caught a glimpse of the datura on the back of her neck, changing color, from light blue to dark red, like a drop of blood seeping out. We ran down the alley, hearing gunshots behind us. I swung the pen with my backhand, and accurately poked the wrist of the man who was chasing me the closest. He fell down with a scream of pain, revealing the tattoo on the inside of his ankle, exactly the same as the mark on the deceased's ankle. Marlowe's men. Leah wiped the blood from her forehead. "They have been waiting for us." We were crouching behind an abandoned newsstand when the police sirens came closer. I took out my cell phone and looked through the photos of the surgical records I had just taken. The time of death of the donors in each transplant operation coincided with the time of the serial murders. "Raid the Foundation," Leah yelled into the intercom. When the police car broke down the gate of the Foundation, we rushed in, only to see a mess on the ground. In Marlowe's desk drawer, There is a yellowed photo in a fire scene. 20 years ago, a man in a white coat is holding an unconscious little boy. In the background, my mother is lying in a pool of blood, her hand still in the posture of pushing the window. That's... Leah's voice was trembling. I stared at the writing on the back of the photo. Subject 07 Hastings Avon. The police technical department soon brought news. The last call record on Watson's mobile phone showed that he called Marlowe's private number 5 minutes before his death. In the interrogation room, the captured subordinate spat out blood and laughed. "You thought you caught the tail?" Mr. Marlowe said that some secrets are best kept in the coffin. I stood on the rooftop of the police station, and the evening breeze blew the white hair on my temples. The lines on the back of my right hand have already reached my shoulders. Looking in the mirror, the wrinkles at the corners of my eyes are deep enough to hide a tear. Leah came over, the mandala on the back of her neck still aching, and she pointed downstairs. Marlowe's private plane took off from Gray Harbor Airport half an hour ago, and its destination is Florida. Florida. I touched the note in my pocket, and suddenly recalled Hoffman's last memory. He collapsed in the warehouse, watching Marlowe squat and peel the skin off his chest with a scalpel, muttering, "This way she can live another day." The little boy who was taken away in the photo had a light blue mark on the back of his neck, which was slowly turning into the shape of a mandala. There was a sound of sirens downstairs. It was Irene and Jack who came to identify the body. The little boy grabbed my trouser leg and asked in a baby voice, "Uncle, will the bad guys be caught?" I squatted down and touched his head. The sea level in the distance began to turn black, like the fire scene that night 20 years ago. There was a faint smell of disinfectant wafting in the wind, mixed with the smell of rust. That was the smell of death, and also the smell of truth. Leah's phone suddenly vibrated. She looked at the screen and her face turned pale. I leaned over and saw a surveillance video on the screen. Marlowe was standing at the door of the plane cabin holding up a photo to the camera. It was a photo of me when I was 7 years old, with experimental subject 07 20 years later, time to be recycled, written on the back. The plane streaked across the sky, leaving a trail of white smoke. I looked at the smoke and suddenly heard the whispers of the dead in my ears. Not Hoffman, not Watson, but my mother's voice, which was farther away. "Evan, run." But this time, I won't run away. I touched my aging face and turned to look at Leah. The mandala on the back of her neck was glowing, and together with the lines on the back of my hand, it formed a complete pattern. "We're going to Florida," I said. "Marlowe's going to get more than just me." Leah nodded, fire burning in her eyes. The police lights were spinning behind her, stretching our shadows very long, like two chains about to intertwine. On the other side of the city, in a dark basement, the freezer was humming. There was a dead body lying inside. The mandala on the back of its neck was still fresh, and in the veins of the chain there was hot. As I poured the last half of the bottle of whiskey into a paper cup, there was a loud knock on the glass window. Leah was checking her gun, and when she looked up, her eyebrows were raised like a knife. I followed her gaze and saw Ross Gray's nose pressed against the glass of the police station's reception room. His curly hair was pressed into clumps by the rain, and he was holding a waterproof document bag in his arms, looking like a stray cat that had been soaked by the rain. That guy was squatting in front of the Marlowe Foundation, taking photos for 3 days last week. He was thrown out by security twice. Leah tightened her holster. "Are you sure you want to let him in?" I downed the whiskey in one gulp. My throat burned. It was my third glass of the day, but the wrinkles around my eyes kept getting deeper. If he hadn't expected it, he would have been sued into bankruptcy by Marlowe's legal team. I wiped the corners of my mouth and nodded to the police officer at the front desk. "Let him in." Ross rushed in, bringing with him a gust of cold wind. Water droplets from the briefcase dripped onto the linoleum floor, leaving dark marks. "Evan, Sheriff Leah." He wiped the rain off his face and tapped his fingers on the file bag quickly. I found the financial loophole of the Marlowe Foundation. Leah's pen tip rested on her notebook. get to the point. Last month they donated a heart-lung machine for transplantation to Sacred Heart Hospital. Ross pulled out a stack of bank statement copies, but the transfer records show that the money was transferred from a shell company in the Cayman Islands. What's even more amazing is that he turned to the second page. 3 days ago, 2 refrigerators were lost in the hospital morgue. They contained donors waiting for organ matching. I held the receipt in my hand and made a mark with my fingernail on the transfer note for subject. How do you know it's related to the case? Last Thursday night, 2 hours before Hoffman's body was found, someone used the Foundation's access card to enter the second basement floor of Sacred Heart Hospital. Ross took out his cell phone and called up a fuzzy surveillance video. The back of a man in a suit flashed around the corner, and there was a dark mark on the back of his neck. The position was exactly the same as the mandala on the back of Leah's neck. Leah's hand suddenly pressed on the back of my hand. The skin on the back of her neck was so hot that it burned me through my shirt. Now, to the Foundation, she said, her voice like taut wire. The Marlowe Foundation's building was built in the old dock area. The exterior walls were painted a pseudo-classical beige, but that couldn't hide the mold in the corners. The finance office was in the innermost room on the 3rd floor. The door was an old-fashioned mechanical lock. I poked it with a paperclip I got from the police station for 20 seconds, and it opened with a click. Watch your feet. Leia held up a tactical flashlight, and the beam swept across the shredded paper on the ground. Obviously someone had been here before us. I squatted down and picked up a half-torn donation agreement. It was stamped with a red seal that read, Organ Transplant Special. The amount column read, US $5 million. And the recipient's name was painted in black. Ross dumped everything in the file bag onto the table. I've hacked into the Foundation's server. The naming convention for encrypted folders is the date, plus OP. He pointed to the lock on the computer host. But the physical lock is up to you. I took out my folding knife and picked the lock on the mainframe, while Leah put on rubber gloves and rummaged through the filing cabinet. The musty smell, mixed with the smell of printer ink, penetrated my nose. I stared at the input box on the computer screen and tapped my fingertips on the keyboard. Marlowe's late wife was named Claire. Their wedding anniversary was June 15th, 1998, and his private jet registration number was N78. Try Claire 1998-0615. I hit enter. The screen flashed, and an encrypted document popped up. Found it. Leah suddenly shouted. She pulled out a brown paper bag from the bottom shelf of the filing cabinet. The wax seal. On the seal was the Marlowe family iris. I leaned over and saw a stack of photos inside. A person in a hospital gown lying on the operating table. The mandala pattern on the back of his neck, still oozing blood. The refrigerator containing the organs was labeled Subject 03 and Subject 05. The one at the bottom was a photo of me, aged 7, being carried into the operating room by a nurse. Exactly the same photo that Marlowe was holding up in the surveillance video. Shit. Ross's camera shutter clicked. This is going to be on the front page tomorrow. The alarm suddenly blew. It's Barney. Leah stuffed the photo back into the paper bag. His police car has a modified siren that's 3 degrees higher than the normal one. Before he could finish his words, there was a kick on the door. Barney's face was pressed into the crack of the door, and his face was as red as if he had just drunk half a bottle of bourbon. Hastings, what the hell are you doing? I turned the computer towards him. Look, our illegal dealings at the Marlowe Foundation. Illegal, S. Barney kicked open the half-closed door, and the baton banged against his palm. This is private property. You broke in without permission. I am arresting you for obstruction of public service. His eyes swept over the paper bag in Leah's hand, and his Adam's apple moved. Sheriff Crawford, you'd better hand over the things now, or I will take you with me. Wait a minute. Ross suddenly raised his phone, and the screen lit up with a live broadcast interface. Friends in Gray Harbor. This is Ross Gray, at the Marlowe Foundation. Barney's face turned pale instantly. In the live broadcast, his police badge number and shoulder straps are clearly visible. I heard shutter sounds coming from the corridor. I looked out and saw that cameras from at least 5 media outlets had been set up at the stairs. Detective Barney. Ross smiled into the phone. Can you explain why you are preventing the police from investigating the Foundation's financial problems? Barney's fingers left white marks on the baton. He glared at me fiercely, then looked at the camera, and suddenly forced a stiff smile. Misunderstanding. All misunderstanding. We are here to protect the scene. He waved to the police officers behind him. Go outside the door, and don't interfere with the investigation. When I turned back, Leah had already opened the encrypted document. The scrolling text made my blood freeze. Subject 07. Hastings Evan. Brainwave frequency matching degree 92%. It is recommended to perform memory extraction. After 20 years. Subject 12. Crawford Leah. Mandala mark stability 87%. Spare organs have been stored in freezer. In the transaction records at the bottom, each transfer corresponded to a corpse, Hoffman, Watson, and a homeless man found in the junkyard last week. It turns out that they have been using organs from the dead. Leah's voice trembled. Those people were not killed randomly. They were selected as experimental subjects. The lights suddenly went out. In the darkness I heard the crisp sound of Ross's camera falling to the ground, and Leah's tactical flashlight lit up and went out, as if it was hit by something. There was a sound of something heavy hitting the filing cabinet, mixed with the rustling of fabric. I touched the fountain pen at my waist. It was the last thing my mother left me. The metal pen cap left a mark on my palm. Evan. Leah's hand grabbed my wrist, wet with sweat. Someone is turning over the table. I followed her force and rushed over to her, crushing into an embrace that smelled of cologne. The other person's elbow pressed against my ribs, and I almost let go of the pain. But I held his wrist tightly, on which was the Patek Philippe watch that Marlowe often wore. Fuck you. The sound of glass breaking. The smell of burning electricity. When the emergency lights came on, the brown paper bag on the table was gone. The computer screen was black, and Ross's camera card slot was broken off, with the memory card inside missing. When Barney rushed in, I was squatting on the ground picking up broken glass. My finger was cut and blood dripped onto the photo of subject 07, dyeing the word recycling dark red. Leah squatted down and wrapped my hand in a handkerchief. The mandala on the back of her neck was hot, sticking to the back of my hand through her shirt, like a piece of burning charcoal. They were prepared, she said softly. From the moment we entered the finance office, Ross kicked the scraps of paper on the ground. His phone was still on. The live broadcast had ended, but the messages in the comment section were still scrolling wildly. Marlowe's people may have seen us on surveillance. He tugged at his wet collar. But how could the files disappear out of thin air? I looked out the window at the darkening sky and heard the whispers of the dead ringing in my ears again. This time it was not my mother, but Hoffman. The scene he saw before he died flashed back in my mind. The white operating light, the man in the white coat holding up the scalpel, and the mandala on the back of his neck glowing blue under the light. Because someone wants to destroy the evidence more than we do. I touched my cheeks, which were gradually becoming loose. The side effects of using my ability were getting worse, but I couldn't care less at the moment. Leah's phone was ringing. Marlowe's number was on the screen, and the note on the caller ID was Dad. She picked up the phone, and I heard Marlowe's voice floating out of the receiver with his usual elegance. Dear Leah, have you had enough fun? It's time to go home for dinner. Leah hung up the phone and slammed it on the table. The mandala pattern on the back of her neck was oozing a light red color, slowly overlapping with the mark on the back of my hand, like a blooming blood-red flower. We need new clues, she said, and Marlowe will soon reveal his true colors. But at this moment I stared at the empty table, and my throat felt like it was stuffed with a ball of blood-soaked cotton. Those crucial documents just disappeared into the darkness. On the other side of the city, in a laboratory lit by cold lights, someone was scanning photos from a brown paper bag into a computer. His face was reflected in the blue light of the screen. It was Detective Barney. A photo of his father was superimposed on the file of the family murder case 20 years ago. The rain is still falling. I looked at the water curtain outside the window and suddenly remembered the body found this morning. The mandala in the freezer is still fresh, and the half fingerprint in the chain pattern is now lying in Marlowe's laboratory and put into the evidence bag. And we have just touched the tip of the iceberg of truth. The fluorescent lights of the autopsy room buzzed overhead, and the smell of disinfectant penetrated my nostrils. Only then did I realize how long I had been standing in the stairwell. Raindrops dripped down the hem of my leather jacket onto the floor tiles, forming small puddles. The sound of Leah's high heels came from behind. She was holding a silver dissection box in her hand. The crisp sound of the metal buckles colliding was like a fine needle, piercing the silence in the corridor. The lock of the filing cabinet was opened with professional tools. She placed the box on the operating table and put on gloves. There are scratches from a pickaxe in the lock cylinder. The same method was used in the theft at City Hall 3 months ago. I took out my crumpled cigarette case and struck the match 3 times in the humid air before it lit. Old man Barney said this morning that he was going to the hospital to follow up with witnesses, but ended up going to the lab to scan files. Smoke wrapped around his throat. His father was a local police officer 20 years ago. He happened to be on duty in Grey Harbor Town when the murder happened. Leah's forceps were suspended in midair, her jawline taut against the stainless steel. So he was in a hurry to destroy the evidence. But Marlowe didn't want destruction. He wanted control. As she lifted the shroud, the cold air from the freezer poured out, and I stared at the blue wrist of the dead man, where there was a circular bruise in the exact same position as the second body 3 days ago. The sound of the scalpel cutting through the skin was like tearing old newspaper. Leah's movements were terrifyingly precise, and each cut followed the direction of the muscle fibers, as if she was disassembling a piece of precision equipment. When I handed her the hemostatic forceps, I caught a glimpse of a dent in the right rib of the deceased. It was not an injury sustained during life. The bone stump was white, and it was caused by some blunt object hitting him after death. Someone rearranged the body before it was dumped. Leah's voice suddenly dropped, and the tip of the tweezers picked up a piece of dark red tissue. There's something in the stomach. I leaned over and saw her using a probe to pick open the gastric mucosa. A metal badge inlaid with black agate was embedded in the semi-digested food residue. The scratches on the surface were blurred by gastric juice, but the cross-shaped laurel leaf pattern was exactly the same as the pattern on the frame of the winged victory oil painting in Marlowe's study. That was the family emblem of Victor's family. The victims of the family murder case 20 years ago all wore a smaller version of the same one around their necks. Shit. I stepped back, knocking over the instrument tray next to me. The sound of a metal tray hitting the ground startled the footsteps outside the door, and Detective Barney's beer belly squeezed in first. He was holding a coffee cup in his hand, with a convenience store label on the wall of the cup. "Hastings, what are you doing?" His eyes swept over the tweezers in my hand, and his voice suddenly rose. "You put that thing in there. I should have thought that you, a drunkard, are not worthy of touching evidence." "Calm down, Barney." Leah pulled off her gloves, her voice as if ice cold. "The entire autopsy process is monitored. You can check the records." "Surveillance," Barney sneered, knocking his coffee cup heavily on the operating table. "The surveillance in the archives room just happened to be broken this morning. Do you believe it?" His face flushed red, and his Adam's apple rolled. "I am arresting you for obstruction of justice, Hastings." I stared at the red corners of his eyes and suddenly burped. I learned this trick in Alcoholics Anonymous. When alcohol paralyzes the nerves, people will unconsciously amplify their most primitive emotions. I stumbled and held onto the operating table. The tweezers clanged down beside the body. "Barney, Barney, old man." You were drinking tequila at the Rusty Anchor last week and said your dad's badge was moldy in the attic. Is that badge related to this? His pupils suddenly contracted. I knew I made the right bet. It was Barney's father who responded to the murder case 20 years ago. Leah quietly retreated to the corner, and I could see her fingers tapping rapidly on her phone, probably sending messages to other people in the bureau.
You're talking fucking bullshit. Barney rushed over and grabbed my wrist. I fell to the side, and my pretend drunken stagger turned into a precise leverage. His elbow hit the dissection table, and coffee splashed all over the table.
I took out the recorder, hidden in my pocket, and quietly pressed my thumb on the pause button. Your father picked up a pocket watch at the scene, right? I squinted my eyes. My voice was as vague as if it was soaked in whiskey. It has a gold case, engraved with VM, the abbreviation of Victor Marlowe. You were afraid of being found out, so you went to the laboratory last week to change the autopsy report, and pushed the time of death back 2 hours. Shut up. His face was completely distorted, and when his fist was raised in the air, the door of the autopsy room was slammed open. 3 uniformed police officers rushed in, led by the newly transferred intern Taylor, who held a cell phone in his hand. Sheriff, the surveillance is restored. The video footage in the archives room shows that Detective Barney used a master key to open the file cabinet at 6 o'clock this morning. Barney's fist froze 3 inches in front of me. He suddenly turned around and grabbed the badge, but Leah snatched it away. According to Section 4D of the Federal Evidence Act, your current actions constitute destruction of evidence. Her tone was terrifyingly calm, and the mandala pattern on the back of her neck was faintly visible at the collar. Taylor, call the bureau and ask the forensic team to extract the fingerprints on the badge. While Barney was cuffed, I took out my recorder and put it in my trouser pocket. His struggling curses echoed in the corridor. I stared at the badge in Leah's hand. The black onyx glowed in the light, like an eye ready to strike. How are you going to respond to Marlowe's dinner invitation? I lit my last cigarette, and the smoke blurred Leah's face. She looked down at her phone. The screen lit up with unread text messages from Dad. He told me to go to Rose Manor at 8 tonight. She put the badge into the evidence bag, and the metal seal clicked. Evan, there was a pregnant woman among the victims of the murder of a family 20 years ago. Her fingers gently stroked the evidence bag. The autopsy report said that the fetus's umbilical cord also had the same mandala pattern. The rain is still falling. I was looking at the water curtain outside the window when I suddenly heard a slight beeping sound coming from the ventilation vents of the autopsy room. It was the frequency of some signal jammer. Leah's cell phone vibrated at this moment, and the caller ID on the screen showed the private number of Rose Manor. It's time to go home for dinner. Marlowe's voice floated out from the speaker, still as elegant as a poem. Dear Leah, don't keep me waiting too long. The fluorescent lights in the autopsy room blurred into a blurry white in the rain. I pressed the last half of my cigarette against the edge of the evidence table, and sparks splashed on the metal surface like a falling star. Leah's cell phone was still on. The number of Rose Manor was jumping on the screen, and Marlowe's voice was like a steel wire dipped in honey, crawling into the eardrum along the current. Dear, I asked old John to prepare your favorite burgundy. Tell him I'm stuck in traffic. Leah tore off her rubber gloves and threw them into the medical waste bin, her knuckles white from pinching them. The autopsy report from 20 years ago was locked in the archives for 20 years, and it was suddenly retrieved this morning. The person who signed the request was... She paused. Evan Hastings. I reached into my inside coat pocket, where I still held the brass key I'd snatched from Barney's trouser pocket. He'd cursed and said it was the latch of the old warehouse, but I could smell the same rust in the teeth of the key, the same smell of blood and rust that I'd smelled when I was 7 years old hiding in the attic. Let's go. I threw the key up and caught it again. To find Victor's foxtail, we have to go to the place where he didn't wipe it clean. The rain in Grey Harbor smells like rust. We walked towards the old town on the cobblestone road covered with fallen leaves. The abandoned steel plant looked like a giant beast that had been dead for 20 years, its black skeleton looming in the rain and fog. Leah's Martin boots stepped over a puddle of water, and the splashing water wet the police badge on her trouser leg. The black agate glowed coldly in the rain, like someone's eyes hidden in the dark. "See that old lady in the grey coat?" Leah suddenly pulled my arm. I followed her gaze and saw a hunched figure drawing something in the puddles with a dead branch under the newsstand at the corner of the alley. Her coat was washed bleach, and she had a faded blue ribbon pinned to her shoulder, the same one the neighbors had pinned on their chests at my mother's funeral. Helen Blake. Leah lowered her voice. She was mentioned in the eyewitness report of the murder of a family 20 years ago. She lived next door to the victim at the time and said she heard a child crying. But when the police arrived, she was shaking in the basement and refused to say anything. My throat suddenly tightened. The sound of rain in my memory suddenly became clear, mixed with the crying of a baby and the crisp sound of breaking glass. I was 7 years old, hiding in a wooden box in the attic. Through the cracks in the wooden boards I saw the man in the black raincoat raising the axe. And Mrs. Helen next door. She should have been knocking on my door. She should have been shouting, "Lucy. Lucy, but why didn't she mention it in her testimony later?" "Evan." Leah waved her hand in front of my eyes. Only then did I realize that I had walked to the newsstand. Mrs. Helen's dead branch stopped in midair, and her cloudy eyes suddenly became frighteningly bright. "It's you." Her voice was like rusty door hinges. "Little Evan, you've grown taller." Her hand grasped my wrist, black paint embedded in the cracks between her nails. I squatted down and saw a crooked mandala flower drawn with dead branches in the puddle at her feet, exactly the same as the tattoo on Barney's arm, and the pattern on the fetus's umbilical cord. "Come with me." She pulled me into the alley, and Leah followed behind with her hand on the pistol at her waist. We walked through 3 alleys lined with beer crates, around half a broken wall covered in ivy, and finally stopped in front of an abandoned red brick house. The paint on the door lintel has peeled off, but the words Huigang Town No. 3 Primary School can still be made out. My first grade classroom was on the easternmost side of the 2nd floor. Helen fished a rusty key from her coat and inserted it into the keyhole with shaking hands. The door creaked open, and the smell of mold and turpentine hit me in the face. The walls, desks, and even the ceiling were covered with graffiti made with spray paint and markers. Distorted human faces, thorny mandalas, calendars with dates circled repeatedly. May 17, 1999. I will always remember that day. The anniversary of my parents' death, and a line of crooked blood-red letters. They are looking for children who can talk. I come here every night. Helen stood on tiptoe, running her fingertips over the graffiti on the wall. The police said I was crazy, and that it was just an accident. But Lucy, my mother's name, came to borrow some candy that morning, and she had this on her wrist. She pointed to a symbol made up of 3 wavy lines. She said it was a new badge made by the Victor Foundation saying that Mr. Marlowe was going to donate a library to the town. I took 2 steps back and leaned my back against the desk I used to sit on. There is an EA carved with a knife on the upper right corner of the desk. It was my masterpiece when I was 7 years old. Next to these 2 letters, someone drew a circle with red paint, and inside the circle was the same wave symbol that Helen had described. Leah took out her cell phone and accessed the official website of the Victor Foundation. The golden badge of the homepage glowed on the screen. 3 smooth wavy lines, exactly like the graffiti on the wall. On May 17th, 1999, the Victor Foundation officially moved into Grey Harbor Town. Leah's voice tightened. On the same day, your parents' convenience store was murdered, killing 6 people, including your mother, who was 7 months pregnant. I felt the hair on the back of my neck stand up. The memory suddenly came to me like a torn old photo. My mother was squatting behind a counter tying a red scarf for me. The silver bracelet on her wrist swayed, covering a small piece of skin. Now that I think about it, was there also this wave symbol underneath? My father was arranging the shelves, humming Tennessee Waltz. On the top shelf were boxes of unopened spray paint, with the label exclusively for Victor Industries printed on them. They're looking for the talking child. Helen suddenly grabbed my shoulders, her nails almost digging into the flesh. That night I heard Lucy shout, "Don't hurt him, he knows nothing." And then there were the gunshots. Little Evan, do you remember when you were a kid you could hear bang?
The sound of breaking glass came from downstairs.
Leah pulled me behind the wall in an instant, with her right hand already holding her service pistol. I noticed that the tips of her ears were unusually red, a habit she had when she was extremely nervous. "Someone's coming in." She lowered her voice. "At least 3 of them. They're walking heavily, wearing rubber-soled shoes." Helen suddenly screamed, and she threw herself at the canvas bag in the corner, which was filled with notebooks full of doodles. "They're going to burn these. They always burn." Helen, "Get down!" Leah's gun went off, and the bullet rubbed the stair railing. I saw 3 men in black raincoats rushing up, their hats pulled low, and their faces covered with dark scarves, revealing only pairs of grey-blue eyes. Exactly the same eyes as those of the foundation directors at the Marlowe Charity Gala. The leading man raised the stun gun, and blue arcs of electricity crackled in the rain and fog. I dragged Helen towards the back door of the classroom, and Leah followed behind. Her second shot shattered the ceiling light in the corridor. In the darkness, all we could hear was her rapid breathing, and the sound of rubber soles rubbing against the ground. "Evan." Leah's voice was bloody. I turned around and saw that her left arm was hanging down. Her police uniform was cut, and blood was oozing out. The back door was locked. My palms were sweaty as I fished out the brass key I'd stolen from Barney. The moment the key was inserted into the lock, I heard Helen screaming in my ear, "They want you, the ones you heard when you were a kid." Amid the crisp sound of metal collision, I suddenly remembered the new wrinkles at the corners of my eyes when I looked in the mirror this morning. Every time the ability of Whisper of the Dead is used, life will go back 1 hour. But this time, I suddenly became afraid that when the truth comes to light, I will be a white-haired old man in the mirror, and those voices hidden in the deepest part of my memory will finally speak. The buzzing sound of a stun gun came from the stairs, getting closer. Leah pressed her pistol into my hands, her body heat still on the handle. "Shoot," she said. "Whatever you see, don't stop." I turned the key. The door opened with a click, and rain poured in with the smell of rust. Behind us, the shadow of a man in a black raincoat had already climbed onto the windowsill of the classroom. The rain curtain pressed down like a rusty lead plate. Just as I took half a step out of the back door, the back of my neck was blew into by the cold wind. Leah's blood dripped onto the back of my hand, abnormally hot. The wound on her left arm was still oozing blood, and a dark red scab had formed on the cuff of her police uniform. 3 o'clock. Leah suddenly pulled my arm and raised the gun barrel past my ear. Only then did I see 2 dark figures passing by the corner, wrapped tightly in black raincoats, with even their chins tucked into their high collars. One of them raised the stun gun, and blue-purple arcs of electricity crackled and exploded in the rain, like a snake spitting out its tongue. Helen huddled between us, the brown paper bag in her arms crushed into a thin sheet by her body. It was a record of the graffiti she had drawn in every corner of the town over the past 20 years, and it contained all the fragments of the murder case 20 years ago, when she was squatting outside the ruins of the old church last night, drawing barbed thorn rings on the brick wall with chalk. I should have thought that this thing would kill us. "They're here for the record." I wiped the rain off my face, my throat tight. The buzzing sound of the stun gun was getting closer, this time coming from the alley on the left, from at least 3 people. Leah's pistol felt as heavy as a piece of iron in my hand, but I didn't dare pull the trigger easily. The police shooting records in Grey Harbor would be dug up by Victor's people, and he wanted us to die in obscurity.
"Evan!"
Leah suddenly groaned, and her right shoulder was cut by a dagger.
She turned around and hit the other person's wrist with the butt of the gun. The sound of metal collision mixed with the sound of rain made people's eardrums hurt. Only then did I realize the tactics of these people. 2 people suppressing from the front, 2 people flanking from both sides, and 1 hiding in the back and reporting the position in a low voice on the walkie-talkie. They are as well trained as retired special agents, not ordinary thugs. It's Victor's men. I gritted my teeth and kicked away the man in the raincoat who was rushing towards me. His rubber soles slipped in the puddles, and his back hit the rusty fire hydrant. Helen suddenly screamed, and I turned around to see another person grabbing the paper bag in her arms, his nails almost digging into the back of her skinny hand. "Protect the records," I shouted at Leah, raising my voice deliberately. Sure enough, the 2 people who had originally attacked me turned to Leah. They knew that as long as they controlled the sheriff, they could nip our resistance in the bud. I ducked and rolled under the cover of the rain, and the moment the rain poured into my collar, I touched the half-buried steel bars at the base of the wall. The steel bar was so rusty that it hurt when I held it in my hand. I swung my hand back at the knee of the man in the raincoat, who was closest to me. I heard a crisp sound of bone breaking. He screamed and fell into the trash can next to him, and the iron sheet made a clanging sound.
Another man rushed over with a stun gun in hand. I turned my head to avoid it, and the tip of the steel bar pierced his wrist, holding the weapon. The moment he let go of the stun gun, I picked it up, and a blue-purple arc of electricity immediately shot up his neck.
"Go." Leah grabbed my arm. There were 3 bloody cuts on the back of her police uniform, but she was still smiling. Helen ran after him like a frightened hedgehog. Her neck shrunk, and the paper bag held to her chest the whole time. We stumbled through 2 streets, but the footsteps behind us became more and more frequent. There were at least 5 people chasing us. The iron door of the abandoned warehouse was ajar, and a musty smell leaked out from the gap. The moment I kicked it open, I tripped over a rusty wrench. This place should have been an old steel factory in the west of the town, but now all that's left are a few scrapped punching machines and mountains of iron scraps. Leah locked the door and propped it up with an iron bucket next to her. Rainwater flowed in through the crack in the door and formed small puddles on the concrete floor. "They have cutting tools." Leah wiped the blood off her face and pointed to the increasingly clear sound of metal friction outside the door. 5 minutes at most. I turned around and rummaged through the wooden box in the corner, which contained several pieces of steel bars, half a can of lubricating oil, and an old notebook with a peeling cover. When I turned to the last page, my hands suddenly shook. Memorial Hall, basement was written in red pen on the edge of the page, and the date was July 15th, 1998, the day when the murder took place, when I was 7 years old. The handwriting was blurred by water, but the last few words could be seen. Ring of Thorns. The key is... Evan! Helen suddenly grabbed my wrist, her nails almost digging into my skin. This is his handwriting. Victor's. I saw him sign the town council minutes book. There was a click sound outside the door, followed by the roar of cutting tools. Leah picked up the steel bar and stood behind the door. The rain dripped down her hair, onto the ground, and mixed with her blood. I clutched the old notebook tightly, and suddenly remembered myself in the mirror this morning. The wrinkles at the corners of my eyes were like cracks, crawling from my brow to my cheekbones. I used Whisper of the Dead too often, and my life was slipping away at a speed visible to the naked eye. They want more than just records. I stared at the paper package in Helen's arms, then looked at the notebook in my hand. Victor is looking for the key from 20 years ago, and the key may be in my mind. The cutting sound penetrated the iron door, causing a harsh echo in the warehouse. Leah nodded at me, her gun pointed at the crack in the door. Helen stuffed the paper package into my arms, her fingers shaking. I was hiding in the attic, and saw him stuff a box into your cellar. There was a thorn ring engraved on the box. The iron door began to deform, revealing a gap as wide as a palm. I fished out the brass key. I had taken it from old drunk Barney this morning, who drunkenly said it was the key to all secrets. Now it lay in the palm of my hand, warmed by the rain, and suddenly looked like a red-hot charcoal. Get ready. I clutched the key in my hand. When they come in, we'll give Victor a big gift. Leah's gun flashed coldly in the rain, and the footsteps outside the warehouse suddenly quieted down. Then the cutting sound stopped, replaced by a duller noise, like something slamming against the door. Helen suddenly froze, her eyes passing me and falling on the darkest corner of the warehouse. "Evan," she said, her voice so soft it was a sigh. "Did you hear that?" I pricked up my ears. Amid the sound of rain, there was a vague voice with an electrical noise. "It's like an old radio that's not tuned in properly." "It's the voice of the dead," I whispered. "The memories that I sealed with my ability are awakening in the darkness." The iron gate was slammed open with a bang, and rain wrapped in dark shadows poured in. I held the key tightly, and heard my own quickened heartbeat, mixed with the thunder of that rainy night. 7 years ago, that day I hid in the closet, heard my mother scream, and a man whispered, "Don't be afraid. I will let you be together forever." And at this moment, that voice was mixed in with the sound of rain outside the door. I stared at the jumping cursor on the computer screen, and the cold sweat on the back of my neck slid down my spine into the collar of my shirt. The fluorescent lights in the archive room flickered, cutting Leah's face into two halves of light and dark. Her fingertips hovered over the keyboard, her knuckles turning white from the effort. We had just cracked the password to Victor's private server, and now we were staring at the complete record of the murder that took place 20 years ago, like watching an old movie soaked in blood. On June 17, 1999, Henry Crawford, a night shift worker at Gray Harbor Steel, and his family of 5 were killed in a home invasion. Leah's voice tightened, but it says here that the murder weapon was a custom-made hunting knife, with VM engraved on the inside of the sheath. She looked up at me. VM stands for Victor Marlowe. I pinched my swollen temples. I had just used Whisper of the Dead 3 times, and now there were fine lines on the corner of my left eye, and the bridge of my nose was sore from where the frame pressed against it. Every hour I used this ability, my life would go back an hour, but I couldn't care less at the moment. Scrolling down the screen, the transfer records, autopsy report, and Barney's father's attendance record from that year pieced together. The truth like a puzzle. Victor bribed the police to stage a murder case, to take his deceased wife's kidney in order to get an organ transplant for her. Barney's father was a responding police officer who destroyed key evidence on the pretext of destruction of the scene. My phone vibrated in my pocket. The moment I took it out, the hairs on the back of my neck stood up. There was a photo on the screen. Helen was tied to a rusty iron chair, with tape on her mouth, and her eyes swollen like 2 purple grapes. The background is the abandoned Gray Harbor sugar refinery, which I am very familiar with. An arson occurred here 10 years ago, and 3 homeless people were burned to death in the boiler room. The message contained only one line: "If you want the librarian to be alive, come to the sugar factory alone at 2 a.m. Fuck. I handed the phone to Leah, my throat feeling like it was clogged with a red-hot coal. Helen is the administrator of the town library. When I was checking old cases last month, she secretly took a photo of the borrowing records from 1999 and showed it to me, saying, "Some books should not be buried in dust." She always wore an amber necklace and said that her grandmother bought it with the money she saved when she worked as a packer in a sugar factory. Leah dug her nails into her palms. "It's a trap." "I know." I pulled off my tie and wiped my face. The mirror showed me sunken eye sockets, and the white hair on my temples was particularly dazzling under the fluorescent light. But Helen was targeted because she helped me. "I'll come with you." She tucked her gun into her waistband, the holster rustling against her jeans. "Barney's on duty tonight, and Victor may have only arranged a peripheral force." The rain fell as we were leaving the city, Leah drove her old Chevrolet, the wipers squeaking and cutting the water streaks on the windshield into twisted webs. The chimney of the sugar factory was looming in the rain like a blackened tombstone. I touched my inside pocket, a tiny camera pressed against my skin, containing a backup of all the evidence. Go around to the side door later. I unbuttoned the second button of my shirt and pointed the camera lens at the collar. I will lead them to the main workshop, and you will find a chance to save Helen. Leah slammed on the brakes. The water splashed by the front of the car hit the street lamp, illuminating her face palely. Did you use your ability? Her eyes swept across the fine lines at the corners of my eyes. Evan, you haven't closed your eyes for 3 days. There's no time. I pushed open the car door, and the rain immediately poured in, soaking my trouser legs. Remember, Barney and Victor are not on the same page. His father's business is a thorn that will fester if it gets deep enough. The iron gate of the sugar factory had a new lock, but the keyhole was rusted. I kicked it twice and the padlock fell into the mud with a click. The workshop was filled with the smell of mold and rust, and water was dripping from the ventilation ducts above heads, forming small puddles on the ground. I felt for the switch at the base of the wall and pulled it twice. A dim light exploded above my head. Victor was standing at the stairs, the cigar in his hand flickering like a will-o'-the-wisp. Barney was huddled behind him, his police badge flashing coldly in the dark. Helen was tied to an iron chair between the two of them, an amber necklace dangling from her collarbone. Welcome home, Evan. Victor's voice sounded like it was soaked in honey. I knew you would come. Barney's Adam's apple moved behind him, and he didn't dare to look me in the eye. I raised my hands to my chest and walked forward slowly. You want evidence? It's in my inside pocket. Don't be impatient. Victor flicked the ash off his cigarette. Let's talk about your sheriff's daughter first. When he smiled, the wrinkles at the corners of his eyes looked like they were carved by a knife. Daughter of the Crawford family, do you know that your grandfather was also at the scene of the murder? Leah's footsteps sounded at the side door, very light, but Barney's shoulders shook. I stared at the red tips of Barney's ears. He had been staring at Helen's necklace, the amber color of which was exactly the same as the one his mother wore in the old photo on his desk. Barney, your father took more than just the evidence. I raised my voice deliberately, but also the amber necklace of Henry Crawford's wife. I looked at Helen. Right? Your grandmother's necklace was picked up by your father's partner. Barney's face instantly turned purple. You're talking nonsense. The photo is in Victor's cloud drive. I took out my phone and called up the blurry old photo. Young Barney's father standing at the crime scene, the amber necklace hanging on his chest, glowing warmly under the flash. He was afraid that you knew he was a thief, so he gave the necklace to Victor. I turned to Victor. Isn't that right?
Mr. Philanthropist, you even want the stolen goods?
Victor's cigar fell to the ground with a pop. He dug his fingers into Barney's shoulders. You didn't tell me. That's enough. Barney shook his hand off, revealing half of his gun in the holster. You said you would destroy my father's records if I helped, but you want to keep even a broken necklace as a souvenir. I took advantage of their standoff and rushed towards Helen. Leah rushed in from the side door, picked up the iron rod on the ground and hit Victor's wrist. Victor cursed and turned to grab Leah's hair, and I rushed over and hit his waist with my shoulder. We rolled on the ground. His ring cut my cheek, and the taste of blood exploded in my mouth. Barney's gun went off, not at us, but at the ceiling. Stop. His voice was shaking, but the gun was pointed at Victor. Hand over the evidence, Marlowe. Victor stared at Barney's gun, and suddenly laughed. Do you think you can get away with it by handing over the evidence? He took out a photo from his suit pocket. Your father was counting money next to the corpse. I put it in a Swiss bank. Barney's hands were shaking badly. I took the opportunity to untie the rope on Helen's hands. Leah had already snatched Victor's phone and quickly pressed the delete key. The evidence is backed up on the FBI server. I took off my tie and tied Victor's wrists. If you surrender now, you can still fight for a reduced sentence. The sound of sirens came from far away. Barney's gun clanged to the ground and he squatted down, holding his head, his shoulders twitching. Helen threw herself into my arms and soaked the front of my shirt with her tears. 2 hours later, the corridors of the Grey Harbor police station were packed with reporters. Leah was interviewed while holding up the evidence bag, her police badge flashing blindingly in front of the camera. I was standing in the stairwell smoking. The wind blew in through the window, making the old wanted posters on the wall rustle. I found the mailbox when I got home. The tin mailbox was half open, and inside lay a brown paper envelope with no stamp and no address. I tore open the envelope, and a piece of white paper floated out, with the words, "This is just the beginning," written in red pen on it. The handwriting is unfamiliar, but the strength of the strokes reminds me of my childhood. Every rainy night when I hid in the closet, I would always hear the sound of pen scratching paper outside the door. I stood at the door holding the piece of paper, and the rain was still falling. In the distance came the sirens of an ambulance, mixed with the barking of someone's dog. The wind lifted the corners of my clothes, and I touched the new wrinkles at the corners of my eyes. Suddenly, I felt that this rain might never stop. I stood on the porch for 10 minutes. The rain dripped down the eaves and landed at my feet, making tiny pits in the concrete floor. The craft paper envelope was wrinkled by me, and the words written in red ink spread out in the humid air like a drop of solidified blood. I nearly dropped the envelope into the rain as my phone vibrated in my pocket. The screen lit up, and it was Leah's name. "Barney's interrogation is complete," she said, her voice covered in the noise of the police station. He admitted that he was hired to follow Helen, but he didn't know who hired him. "Where are you?" "Downstairs at my house." I took out the key, and the metal teeth stuck in the keyhole, and turned 3 times before opening the door. "Leah, I received a letter." There was a sudden silence on the other end of the line. I could hear her shuffling papers, and then the creaking of a chair being dragged. "Wait for me 5 minutes." After I hung up the phone, I spread the envelope out on the kitchen table. The desk lamp was covered with a layer of dust, and the light shone through the glass cover, making the letter paper look white. The strokes of red ink are strong, and you can feel the raised texture on the back of the paper. This was written with a fountain pen. The nib is a bit blunt, probably an old Hero 616, which my father always used. The old clock on the windowsill struck 7, and the siren of Leah's police car sounded at the entrance of the alley, as I held the envelope with tweezers and leaned close to the desk lamp. When she opened the door, a gust of wind came in. The hem of her police uniform was still dripping with water, and the ends of her hair stuck behind her ears. "Where is it?" I pointed to the dining table. She picked up the letter without wearing gloves, and rubbed the raised pen marks with her thumb. "There is no postmark. The envelope is ordinary, number 3 craft paper, which can be bought everywhere in the market." She looked up at me. "The red ink is water-soluble. It may be mixed with alcohol, so it is slow to smudge." "How do you know?" "I learned this in the forensic science class." She pulled the corner of her mouth and took out a magnifying glass from her pocket. "The handwriting is tilted at an angle of 15 degrees, and the horizontal bar of the letter T is always pressed above the vertical line. This is a habit of left-handed people, but they deliberately wrote it with their right hand." She suddenly stopped. "Evan, when you were a child..." "My dad is left-handed," I interrupted her. Childhood memories seemed to be fast-forwarded. The closet on a rainy night, the sound of my father's pen tip, scraping across letter paper, my mother screaming in the living room, and then the sound of gunfire. I touched the corners of my eyes, where the skin was looser than it was this morning. The strength of this letter is the same as what I heard when I was hiding in the closet. Leah's fingers paused on the letter. She took off the magnifying glass, and the police badge shone coldly under the light. "In the files of the murder case 20 years ago, there was half a diary in your parents' study, and the last page was torn off." She took out her phone and flipped through the photos. In the photos of the scene at that time, There were traces of pen ink on the desk, and the shape was the same as the smudge of this letter. It matches, I finished for her. The rain outside the window suddenly got heavier, and the glass was smashing loudly. Leah's phone screen was lit between us. On the faded wooden table in the photo, the dark brown ink was blurred into irregular circles, almost overlapping the blurred outline of the corner of the letter in my hand. "Post office," I said suddenly. Leah looked up at me and said, "The anonymous letter has no stamp, which means it was delivered locally. There are only 2 post offices in Grey Harbor, and the one on Main Street has a public mailbox." The fluorescent lights of the Main Street post office hummed as an old woman behind the counter punched out bills on a calculator. When she looked up, I recognized it as Mrs. Martha, my high school neighbor who now had a twitching left eyelid. "A letter." She pushed her reading glasses. "I cleared the mailbox at 8:30 this morning. This envelope," she squinted, "seems to have been stuffed in from the 3rd row of boxes. Our mailbox is coin-operated, so we don't need stamps, but..." She knocked on the monitor under the counter. "The camera has been broken for half a month. It was struck by lightning last Tuesday." Leah tapped her fingers on the edge of the counter. "Any witnesses?" "I haven't noticed." Mrs. Martha folded the bills. "Recently, people have been dropping off letters in the middle of the night. Last Wednesday, someone found half a bloody handkerchief." "Martha." A male voice suddenly came from the inner room. A man in navy blue work clothes poked his head out, holding a half-rolled wire in his hand. "Don't tell the police about this nonsense." Mrs. Martha's eyelids twitched even more violently. She hurriedly pushed our registration book over to me and said, "Fill out the form if you want to check." 3 days later, "No thanks," I interrupted her. Next to the newspaper rack on the back wall, a man in a dark gray hoodie was looking down at the Grey Harbor Times. The newspaper was held upright, with only the lower half of his face visible. The toes of his shoes were covered in mud, and his left foot had more skin rubbed off than his right. Exactly the same pair of shoes I had seen at the entrance of my alley half an hour ago. "Leah," I whispered. She followed my gaze and saw the figure behind the newspaper stand suddenly move. The newspaper fell to the ground with a clatter, and Hoodie turned and ran, knocking over the magazine rack next to him. "Chase." Leah's police boots made a crisp sound on the tiles. I rushed out the door and saw the man in the hoodie turning into the alley behind the church in the rain. There was half a foot of water in the alley, and our heels made splashes. Hoodie ran steadily, turning left and right like a cat that was familiar with the route. I hear Leah yelling, "Left," from behind. She cuts across a discarded wooden fence, and I chase Hoodie down a dead end. He is gone. The damp brick wall was green in color, and at the end was a cement wall about 1 meter high, with a few broken cardboard boxes piled at the base of the wall. I kicked the cardboard box open and saw a half-open sewer opening underneath, with the iron grill tilted to one side. The rainwater poured in, making gurgling sounds. "Evan," Leah ran over from the other side, with a cut on the sleeve of her police uniform. He climbed over the wall. "Impossible." I squatted down. There was half a shoe print on the mud at the sewer entrance, which matched the left foot of the hoodie. I reached out to touch the base of the wall, and my fingertips touched something hard, a notebook with a black cover, the edges of which were worn white, stuck in the cracks between the bricks. Leah squatted down, the rain dripping down her chin onto the notebook. I opened the first page, and the smell of mold and rust came out. The handwriting on the paper was very messy, and the date was written in blue-black ink. May 7. Below that was a string of numbers, 3712, followed by a symbol that looked like an upside-down triangle with a slash through it. The second page is May 20, 1999, and the numbers become 5915 with the same symbols. The date on the third page was May 23, and the numbers were 7/11/17. There were brown drops next to the symbols. I leaned closer and smelled them. It was blood. May 25, 1999. Leah's voice suddenly became tense. I turned to that page and saw the date circled in red pen. The numbers were 9, 13, 19, and a line of small words written under the symbol, "Last Chance." The rain dripped from the eaves onto the notebook, blurring the word "will" in "last chance." I looked up at Leah. Her police badge was shining coldly in the rain, exactly the same light I had seen on my father's badge through the crack in the closet 20 years ago. "Go back to the police station." She stuffed the notebook into the evidence bag. "Find a handwriting expert, and find a case that matches the date." I touched the corners of my eyes, and found that the wrinkles there were deeper than this morning. The rain was still falling, flowing down the back of my neck into my collar, and I shivered with cold. The shoe prints left by the hoodie gradually blurred in the mud, as if they were deliberately erased by someone. As we walked through the puddles toward the police car, I heard Leah's cell phone ringing. She continued and said a few words, then suddenly stopped. "What?" "Say it again." She turned to look at me, the police lights spinning behind her, dividing her face into two halves. "The surveillance in the morgue is broken." Her voice was as light as raindrops. "The body of the homeless man that was delivered last night is gone." I clutched the envelope in my pocket. The words "This is just the beginning," written in red ink, still leave marks on my palm. And the date in the notebook, May 25, 1999. The day my parents were killed. Chapter 11. The Hidden Mystery of Symbols and Codes. When I rushed into the police station with Leah, the hem of my uniform was still dripping with mud. Joseph, the veteran police officer, at the front desk, was about to speak when he caught a glimpse of the notebook wrapped in an evidence bag in Leah's arms. His Adam's apple moved, and he swallowed his words back. The new sheriff had been in Grey Harbor for 3 months, and had already conducted 3 surprise interrogations of drug dealers overnight, to make it clear to everyone not to ask unnecessary questions when she was investigating a case. "Technical department." She uttered 2 words, and the rain fell on the ground along the brim of the police hat, leaving dark footprints on the linoleum floor. I followed her into the corridor. The chill on the back of my neck had not yet dissipated. It was the rain flowing down my spine into the collar, like an ice needle piercing an old scar. It was also this cold when I hid in the closet at the age of 12. The silver light on my father's badge pierced into my eyes through the gap, and then there was my mother's suppressed scream, and the dull sound of a knife hitting bones. The fluorescent lights in the technical department are so bright that it is hard to open your eyes. I saw Leah's knuckles turn white as she slammed the evidence bag on the table. "Check the year," she said to Technician Mark. "All crime records in Hugang Town on May 25, 1999, including unsolved cases." Mark pushed up his glasses, the keyboard clacking, the blue light of the screen dancing on his face. I looked down at the notebook on the table. The cover was a faded dark brown, and the corners were curled, as if it had been rubbed repeatedly. The writing on the inside pages was written with a fountain pen, and the blue-black ink smudged in some places like tears. "The symbols are on page 3. I pointed to the notebook, the diamonds and triangles next to the date, and the short horizontal lines between the numbers. Leah leaned closer, her hair brushing across the back of my hand, with a light minty scent of shampoo. She always said that forensic laboratories required a keen sense of smell, so no perfume was used. "It looks like some kind of code." She picked up a page with tweezers. "The numbers are 92, 90, 90, 90, 90, 90. 5, then the third ceremony, and then the string of symbols." Mark suddenly whistled. "The crime report record on May 25, 1999. There is only one case of family homicide." He turned his chair and looked at us. "The Hastings family. The husband and wife were both dead, and the child was missing." My throat tightened, and I took out the envelope from my pocket. The words "This is just the beginning," written in red ink, still left a red mark on my palm. Leah's eyes scanned my expression, then quickly moved back to the screen. "What about the others? Are there any that haven't been archived?" "The Bureau's system doesn't have it, but the old archives may have it." Mark scratched the back of his neck. Back in 1999, they were still paper records. A batch was lost when we moved in 2003. They said they were gnawed by rats. But who knows? He lowered his voice. I heard that the Victor Foundation donated money to repair the archives, and nothing has been lost since then. Victor. The name is like a thorn in the eardrum. I remembered what I saw in the cemetery yesterday. The white roses he presented to his deceased wife, with dew on the petals, exactly the same as the flowers at my mother's funeral 20 years ago. Leah tapped her fingers on the table, the same rhythm she used when she was thinking. Try to decipher the symbols. She turned to me. You studied cryptanalysis in the FBI. Profilers are not cryptanalysts. I loosened my collar, and the chill on the back of my neck turned into a burning sensation. It happens every time I use Whisper of the Dead, as aging crawls like a snake through my veins. I spent an extra half hour last night watching The Memory of a Homeless Man. Now the wrinkles at the corners of my eyes are big enough to kill a mosquito. But maybe someone does. I pulled out my cell phone and found Ross Gray's number. This reporter who always lurks outside the Victor Foundation secretly went through my garbage last month, looking for clues in order to investigate the financial loopholes of the charity dinner. Maybe his illegal investigative methods can come in handy. 20 minutes later, Ross kicked open the door of the technical department, with mud on his rain boots and a camera hanging around his neck. Hastings. He threw his wet coat on the back of the chair, his eyes shining like a vulture that found rotten meat. I heard that you found an old notebook. Is it related to Victor? Just as Leah was about to speak, he had already leaned in front of the table, his nose almost touching the evidence bag. Rhombus and triangle. I've seen these symbols. He took out his phone and flipped through the photos. When I checked the old factory of the foundation last year, I saw similar marks engraved on the wall. The workers said it was a progress code. Victor's father opened a steel mill and used symbols to represent the process. Diamonds represent smelting. Triangles represent cutting. Short dashes separate steps. And numbers are batch numbers. Batch number. Leah frowned. Victor's father's factory closed down but the symbol system may have been inherited. Ross quickly swiped his phone and pulled up a blurry old photo. Look, this is the inside page of the factory safety manual in 1987. The diamond drive represents special orders, and the numbers are dates and quantities. If we correspond to this, he grabbed Mark's pen and wrote on the note, Y-vert is special handling. 7 may be the 7th workshop. Oh God, he suddenly paused. E is the cold storage. UI-vert incinerator. 11. Number 11. Number 11 what? I asked. Ross looked up, his eyes trembling behind his glasses. Incinerator 11. The incinerator number of the old crematorium in Greyhaven. The one that closed in 1998. Just 2 miles west of the Hastings house. The air conditioner in the technical department suddenly made a humming sound. Leah's fingers pressed on the string of symbols, her nails turning white. The third ritual. Ritual. She repeated the word. On May 25, 1999, the day the Hastings family was exterminated, someone performed the third ritual in the crematorium's number 11 incinerator. Wait. Mark suddenly pointed at the computer. The scanned copy of the old archive has arrived. At 2 a.m. on May 25, 1999. The security guard at the crematorium reported that he heard an unusual noise coming from furnace num. The police record said no abnormalities, but there was a photo attached. He enlarged the picture, and in the black and white photo with blurred pixels, the metal door of incinerator number 11 was half open, and there were dragging marks on the ground, like someone had been dragged in. With a click, the door of the technical department was pushed open. I looked up and saw 6 men in black suits standing at the door. The tall man in the lead showed his ID. FBI, Special Investigations Team. His voice was like sandpaper cleaning glass. We need to take over all the evidence and investigation records in this case. Leah stood up. the police badge flashing coldly on her shirt. According to the town's autonomy regulations, cross-jurisdiction investigations require the permission of the local police station. The regulations do not apply to national security cases. The tall man interrupted her, his eyes sweeping across the notebook on the table. Now hand over the evidence. Ross had his camera raised. I'm a reporter from the Grey Harbor Times, and I need to record. Journalists have no right to be here. Another man in a suit grabbed Ross's wrist and his camera fell to the ground with a smack. I rushed over to help Ross, but the tall man put his hand on my chest with surprising force. Mr. Hastings, we need to talk to you too. His thumb rolled over my collarbone, where there was an old scar from when I was 12 years old, and was cut by broken glass when I crawled out of the gap in the closet. I suddenly noticed that he had a silver brooch on his tie with a diamond-shaped triangle pattern, exactly the same symbol as in the notebook. What? I stared at the brooch. The ritual of incinerator weapon, or the old code of the Victor Foundation? The tall man's pupils shrank. I caught this subtle change. I tilted my head deliberately. Actually, I have already cracked the symbol. Altitor means termination, and 7 means the 7th confession. No, he blurted out, then pursed his lips. What's wrong? I asked. Is the number wrong? He looked away, but his fingers betrayed him. They were unconsciously tapping the rhythm of 4. Leah suddenly pulled out her gun and slammed it on the table. The click of the safety opening froze everyone. Either show me a formal transfer order, or get out of my police station now. She didn't point her gun at anyone, but her eyes were like knives. Joseph, she shouted to the front desk police officer. Contact the state legislator's office and tell them that federal agents have illegally entered. The tall man's jawline was straight. At this moment, Ross's phone suddenly rang. He held up the phone with the screen lit, and shook it. I live broadcasted the conflict just now. There are 3,000 people watching now. He laughed. Grey Harbor Sheriff versus Mysterious Agent. Isn't the title explosive enough? The men in suits exchanged glances. The tall man took a last look at the notebook on the table, and when he turned around he knocked over Mark's coffee cup. The dark brown liquid splashed on the symbol photo, just covering the... We will be back. He said this, and left quickly with his men.
Shit.
Ross picked up the broken camera. At least I got the brooch. He zoomed in on the photo, and the diamond-shaped triangle pattern was clearly visible. It's the same badge on the Foundation's website. Victor's personal assistant wears this. Leah squatted down and wiped the coffee stains on the table with a tissue. The edge of the symbol blurred by the liquid revealed another string of small words. Night Owl, 0 o'clock. She looked up at me. Night Owl is another name for the crematorium, right? I touched the corner of my eye and found that the wrinkle there had deepened. The rain was still falling outside the window, hitting the anti-theft net of the technical department, making a crackling sound. The symbols in the notebook glowed faintly blue under the light, like some living creature, crawling out along the paper lines. The brooch pattern left by the tall man shone coldly in the photo on my phone, overlapping with the words, "This is just the beginning," written in red ink in my pocket. Go to the old crematorium tonight, I heard myself say. My voice as hoarse as a rusty gear. Bring Ross's codebook and Mark's old photo. Leah didn't say anything, but stuffed the evidence bag into the inner pocket of her bulletproof vest and fastened it with the metal buckle. Click, like some kind of oath. Ross stuffed the remains of the camera into his backpack. I know there's a hole in the back wall of the crematorium. I used it to take pictures of homeless people's dens 3 years ago. His fingers were shaking, but his eyes were terribly bright. Victor thought he could cover up all the traces, but old houses can speak, especially those that have been burned. The rain is still falling. I stared at the symbol photo on the table. I could vaguely see the word A in the part blurred by coffee. The strokes were incomplete, as if they had been deliberately scraped off by someone. The sound of a car starting was heard outside the window. The investigation team's car drove away, but the brooch pattern they left behind was still shining on the mobile phone screen. like a pair of eyes staring at us. Leah's phone suddenly vibrated. She glanced at the screen and her face changed suddenly. The backup surveillance in the morgue has been restored. She turned the phone towards me. In the picture, the body of the homeless man was dragged to the corner of the wall. There was a clear shoe print in the dragging trace, exactly the same as the one left by the hoodie in the mud this morning. And in the last second before the body was dragged into the shadows, the camera captured his right index finger, making a 3 gesture towards the camera. The third ceremony. I clenched the envelope in my pocket. The red ink writing had been blurred by sweat, but the words "This is just the beginning" were still clear. Incinerator number 11 of the old crematorium. Night owl. Midnight. The secrets hidden in the symbols are seeping into the ground with the rain, and we are about to uncover the first brick soaked in blood. The raindrops hit the old iron roof of the police station, like someone hitting you on the head with steel balls. I rubbed my swollen temples. The notebook in front of me was spread out under the evidence light. The edges of the pages were yellowing, and if you got close you could smell mold mixed with a hint of rust. That was the smell of blood that had seeped into the fibers for 20 years. This symbol matches the shoe prints in the morgue surveillance. Leah pointed her finger at the photo, her police badge casting a diamond-shaped shadow on the table. I compared the indentations at the 3 murder scenes. They were all the same hiking boots. Size Grey Harbor Outdoor Store only bought 30 pairs last year. I held the fountain pen and traced on the blank space of the notebook. The ink spread on the incomplete strokes of the word I. I suddenly remembered that when I was 7 years old, I saw a similar symbol on the back of my mother's neck, while she was kneeling on the kitchen floor, wiping blood. I hid under the dining table. At that time she turned around and smiled at me, saying, "Don't be afraid, Mom is here." But the bloodstains on her apron were clearer than her smile. The password is divided into sections. I turned the pen upside down and tapped the paper. The first half is the date, October 23rd, 1999, the day my family was murdered. The second half. His throat suddenly tightened, and the pen rolled to the corner of the table. It's my mother's birthday. Leah's breath hitched. She took out the brooch left by the investigation team from the evidence bag. The iris engraved on the metal surface glowed coldly under the light. Victor's Charity Foundation badge is the same as the button mold left at the scene of the murder 20 years ago. She pressed the brooch on the symbol in the notebook, and the 2 patterns overlapped perfectly. He used charity as a cover, but what he collected was not donations at all. I opened the envelope and a yellowed newspaper clipping fell out. The front page headline was "Fire Breaks Out at Huigang Steel Plant, Killing 13 Workers." On the back of the clipping was written in red ink, in the same twisted handwriting as the threatening letter, "Night Owl's Third Eye." Night Owl was Victor's code name, and I had seen this design on the whiskey label in his study. A crow with 3 eyes. The third ritual. Leah suddenly grabbed her phone. The blue light from the screen made the corners of her eyes turn blue. Barney transferred the officer guarding Victor this morning, saying he was going to cooperate with the state police investigation. She pressed the headset. "I just received a call from the detention center. Victor and Barney escaped from prison." Alarms rang in the corridor. I grabbed the notebook and stuffed it into the inner pocket of my windbreaker, while Leah had already picked up her gun and was checking the magazine. The collar of her police uniform was slightly open, revealing a pale pink scar below her collarbone, exactly the same shape as the mark that the serial killer had carved on his victims, a secret she had told me just last night. "They're coming to steal the notebook." I tore down the police station map from the wall and circled the archives room and interrogation room with a red pen. Barney knows the blind spots of the surveillance, and Victor brought people with him. We have to set up the battlefield on the 2nd floor. Leah put the gun in my hand. "You crack the code, and I'll set the trap." She rubbed the back of my hand with her fingertips. There was an age spot there, a new one that appeared this morning when she used Whisper of the Dead to read the homeless man's memory. "Don't use your ability. You're getting 5 years older every hour now." I nodded, knocking over my coffee cup as I turned. The brown liquid spread across the floor plan, just covering the emergency ladder leading to the top floor. Barney had it repaired himself last week, and now that I think about it, the butter in the keyhole should still be there. 10 minutes later, the sound of breaking glass was heard downstairs. I squatted behind the shelves in the archive room, listening to the crisp sound of leather boots stepping on broken glass. When I counted to the third footstep, Leah's flare exploded with a red light outside the window. Searched separately. It was Barney's voice, hoarse from alcohol and cigarettes. That bastard must be hiding somewhere. Bang. Gunshots rang out in the corridor, mixed with the dull sound of a heavy object falling to the ground. I stuck my head out and saw Leah flash out from behind the ladies' room door, with smoke still coming out of the muzzle of the gun. At her feet lay a man in a leather jacket, shot in the calf, blood seeping through the cracks in the tiles. "Archives," roared another voice. I quickly pulled back, my fingers flying across my notebook. The last part of the code was Morse code, with the third underground floor of the steel plant jumping out between the dots and dashes, followed by a string of numbers, the number of missing people in Grey Harbor Town, which was exactly the number of orphans funded by the Victor Foundation. Found it. I looked up and saw Victor standing at the end of the shelf, his suit neatly dressed, even his tie not messed up. He pointed the gun at Leah, who was half kneeling on the ground with blood on her right wrist. She had knocked over the fire extinguisher when she was dodging the bullet. "Give me the notebook, Evan." Victor's voice was like a toast. "I can let you hear your mother's last words again." I reached for the envelope in my pocket, and the edge of the newspaper clipping cut my palm. That rainy night 20 years ago suddenly flashed back in front of my eyes. My mother stuffed me into the cellar, said run along the sewer, and then turned around and locked the door. The symbol on the back of her neck glowed in the candlelight, overlapping with the iris on Victor's brooch to form a bloody mist. "You can't keep her." I held up my notebook. "Your wife's memory has long since rotted in the incinerator, along with the bodies of those workers." Victor's pupils shrank into pinpoints. Behind him, Barney rushed over with a gun in hand, but his ankles were entangled by the handcuffs thrown by Leah. The old detective stumbled against the shelves, and boxes of files fell down, landing right on his gun-holding hand. I rushed over to grab Leah's gun, but Victor grabbed me by the collar. He had incredible strength, like a rusty old machine that suddenly started to move. I elbowed him in the ribs and felt the protrusion of metal under the bone. A steel plate, the same one that had survived the steel plant explosion. "You think you've found the end?" Victor panted in my ear. "There are 13 furnaces buried under Grey Harbor, each burning human organs." He pressed his gun against my lower back. "And your mother." Gunshots were heard overhead. Victor's body stiffened and warm blood splashed on my face. I looked up and saw Barney holding a gun with smoke coming out of the muzzle. The old detective had an expression on his face, as if he had seen a ghost. He was clearly trapped under a pile of files just now. "Your father is also on the list." Leah's voice came from behind. She covered her bleeding wrist but smiled like a wolf. On October 23, 1999, he opened a back door for the murder of the family murder case. Barney's gun falls to the ground. Victor took the opportunity to push me away, broke the window and jumped out. I could hear the roar of a car in the rain. When I ran to the window, I could only see its taillights turning around the corner in the direction of the old crematorium. Leah squatted down and searched Barney's pockets, and took out a bunch of keys with the door card of the steel plant warehouse on it. I opened the last page of the notebook and saw the following written in fresh blood. "When the night owl flutters its wings, the third eye devours the dawn." The phone vibrated on the table. It was an anonymous text message. I clicked on it and saw a photo of a secret room filled with instruments. 13 yellowed name tags were hung on the wall, and the top one read, "Mary Hastings," my mother's name. The text message contains only one line.
"Are you ready for the dawn, Inspector Evan?"
The rain outside the window suddenly got heavier, and the sound of it hitting the glass was like someone typing Morse code. Leah's hand was on my shoulder. her body temperature seeping through her police uniform, but it was colder than the rain. We all heard the roar of the incinerator starting up in the distance. The rain curtains formed a grey net on the window glass. I stared at the photo on the screen of my mobile phone. The edges of my mother's work name card were yellow, but the words Mary Hastings were like red-hot iron nails driving into my retina. Leah pinched my shoulder lightly with her fingers. Her police uniform was still stained with Barney's blood, and the fishy smell mixed with rainwater penetrated into my nostrils. "The incinerator at the old crematorium," she said in a low voice. "The last fuel-powered one in town. There will be a diesel smell when it starts." I sniffed, and sure enough, a choking burnt smell came in from the vents. What was Victor going to destroy by the escape route he chose? Barney slumped to the ground like a scaled fish. His police badge fell at his feet, shining coldly in the puddles. When Leah squatted down, I saw that the wound on her wrist was still bleeding, and the edge of the gauze had turned into a dark red flower. "Send him to the police station first." I kicked Barney's foot. "We need to find out about his father's affairs."
Investigate.
Leah pulled off the silk scarf from her neck and wrapped it around her wrists, moving as swiftly as if she were tying up a cordon at a crime scene. "The secrets of Grey Harbor are all buried underground. If they are dug out, the world will fall apart." She shook the access card in her hand. "The warehouse of the steel plant. When the murder happened in 1999, that area was under the jurisdiction of Barney's father." I took out my cigarette box and found only half a crumpled Marlboro cigarette left inside. When I lit the matchstick, it burned hot between my fingers, like someone was poking my temple with a thin needle. The phone vibrated again. It was still the same anonymous number, but this time it was a voice message. I pressed the play button, and a man's laughter came from the noise of electricity, like rusty gears grinding glass. "Inspector Evan, don't you want to hear your mother's last words?" The hair on the back of my neck stood up. I looked up suddenly and saw the sycamore leaves outside the window being blown by the wind and hitting the glass. It seemed as if someone was sticking there, but there was only rain, only rain. "I'm going to the morgue." I pressed the cigarette butt against Barney's police badge, and the sparks crackled on the metal surface. "Check the victims of the 3 recent murders. They all went to the old crematorium before they died." Leah's pupils shrank. Of course she knew that 7 people had died in Grey Harbor in the last 3 months, and each of the dead had coal ash from the crematorium in their stomachs. The forensic report said that it was incompletely burned anthracite particles. "You want to use your powers?" She grabbed my arm, digging her fingers into my muscles. "Last time you used it for 20 minutes, you had 3 gray hairs. This time, 3 dead people." "3? I touched the back of my head and felt a strand of stiff white hair. "It seems I'm getting older faster than I thought." The morgue was in the basement of the police station. The musty smell mixed with the sour smell of formalin was so cold that it made people's teeth tremble. The first body was that of Joey, a longshoreman whose skull had been crushed by a blunt object. I squatted in front of the stretcher, with my fingertips touching his cold eyelids. When whispers of the dead started, my temples felt like being pounded by an electric drill, and fragments of memory flowed into my brain along my nerves. Joey's POV. Rain heavy. He walked toward the side door, holding on to the brick wall of the old crematorium, the wine bottle in his pocket clinking against the wall. The door opened a crack, revealing half a face. It was Barney. Barney was holding a tin box in his hand, and stuffed a stack of bills into Joey's hand. "Don't worry about what happened tonight." Then Joey turned to leave, and felt a pain in the back of his head. The last scene was the shadow of the tin box falling down. The second body was that of convenience store clerk Amy, whose throat had been slashed. Her memory was even more hazy, like an old movie covered in fog. She was on the night shift and heard a cat meowing in the back alley. She went out with a flashlight and saw Victor standing next to the trash can, dressed in a suit and holding a scalpel in his hand. "Do me a favor," he said in a voice soaked in honey. Put this box in the locker. When Amy took the box, the blade was already against her neck. The third body was that of homeless man, old Bob, who was charred by the intense heat of the incinerator. His memory was most vivid, as if it had just happened. He was curled up in the abandoned boiler room of the crematorium and heard someone talking. 13 people, one was missed that year. It was Victor's voice. The kid from the Hastings family must be dealt with. Another voice was hoarse, like sandpaper cleaning glass. He has that ability, and it's not easy to deal with him. Victor chuckled. So we need Barney's door card and Tanya's research. The pain suddenly exploded. I stumbled and knocked over the gurney, hitting my forehead on the metal cabinet, blood running down my eyebrows into my eyes. When Leah held me up, I looked in the mirror behind her. Half of my hair was white, and the wrinkles on my temples were deep enough to fit a coin. Fuck. I wiped my face, blood mixed with tears dripping onto the tiles. They are looking for the 13 people from that year, and my mom is one of them. Old Bob heard it. Victor mentioned Tanya.
Tanya Cole.
Leah frowned. The psychiatrist? She evaluated Barney last week. Before he finished speaking, the door of the morgue was pushed open. A woman in a white coat stood at the door, her blonde hair neatly tied up, the pearl necklace around her neck glowing blue under the cold light. Inspector Evan. Tanya's voice was like a silver spoon soaked in warm water. I've been waiting for you for a long time. Her eyes flickered across my graying hair, across Joey's body, and finally landed on my clenched fists. Your temporal lobe abnormality is very rare. She walked in, her high heels tapping the ground. The connection between the hippocampus and the amygdala is 3 times stronger than that of ordinary people, which is why you can read the memories of the dead, but every time you use it, it will accelerate the aging of the synapses. She pointed to the white hair at my temples. This is just the beginning. How do you know? I stood in front of Leah, although I didn't know her purpose. The alarm on the back of my neck was screaming. Tanya took out a USB drive from her bag and placed it on the gurney. 20 years ago, Mary Hastings worked in the steel plant laboratory, studying temporal lobe abnormalities. Her fingertips lightly slid across the USB drive. This is her experimental record. I found it in the secret room of the old crematorium. My blood ran cold. The photos in the phone suddenly flashed before my eyes. There were 13 work badges on the wall, and the top one was my mother. Who are you? Someone who wants to help you. Tanya took a half step back and glanced at Leah. But I need you to cooperate with the research. Your ability may be the key to unlocking all the secrets of Grey Harbor. Leah suddenly grabbed her wrist, moving as fast as a snake.
How did you get into the morgue?
She had her gun pointed at Tanya's waist. Who allowed you to get close to Evan? Sheriff. Tanya's smile remained unchanged. The wound on your wrist was sutured using the 19th century suture technique. Right. The same as the wound of the victim in the 1999 family murder case. She lowered her voice. Do you think you are an exception? Leah's fingers were shaking. I grabbed her wrist and gently pushed the gun down. I'll go with you, I said to Tanya. But now I have to go to Victor's charity dinner. Tanya raised an eyebrow. He's hosting a dinner at City Hall tonight, openly questioning the efficiency of the police. That's perfect. I took off the tie around my neck and tied a knot casually. I want to ask him in person whether his late wife's name is on the list of 13 people. The rain is still falling. As Leah and I walked out of the police station, we saw the neon lights of the City Hall turned into a red mist in the rain. Tanya's car stopped at the corner and flashed its lights twice, waiting for me. Be careful. Leah held me back, her fingers still shaking. Victor's dinner party could be a trap, but he wanted me to go. I touched the USB drive in my pocket. My mother's handwriting seemed to burn my skin through the plastic shell. Otherwise, he wouldn't have sent that photo through an anonymous text message. The marble steps of the City Hall were filled with reporters, and the flashing lights were blinding. Victor stood at the top of the steps in his tailor-made suit, like a gilded god. When he saw me, the corners of his mouth raised in a perfect arc. "Detective Evan, I heard that you are investigating an old case recently. Do you need me to donate some funds?" The crowd laughed. I pushed aside the reporters and stood in front of him. "Mary Hastings," I said, looking him in the eye. "What did she see in the steel mill laboratory on October?" Victor's pupils shrank into pinpoints. His hands were shaking, but he still maintained an elegant smile. "Inspector, you should see a psychiatrist." "I'm on my way." I turned and walked towards Tanya's car, the rain cutting my face like knives. The USB drive is heavy in my pocket. My mother's notes may contain the secret of my abilities, the secret of Grey Harbor Town, and the truth of all deaths. Tanya's laboratory is in the old hospital in the west of town, and the sound of the rusting iron door is like a scream. When she turned on the light, I saw a wall of brain maps, all of which were my CT scans. Different dates, different conditions, and details that I had never seen before. "Sit down." She pointed to the recliner. "We're about to start." The fluorescent lights in the ceiling wavered as I lay there. Tanya put on her gloves, the instrument in her hand, flashing blue light. I stared at the glass case behind her, which contained a metal box with Hastings Laboratory engraved on the lid, exactly the same box that old Bob remembered Victor letting Amy take. The moment the instrument was placed on my forehead, I could hear my heart beating like a drum. Tanya's voice came from above. "Relax, Evan. You will know everything. But I know this is the real beginning." The moment the instrument touched my forehead, my back teeth began to clatter. Tanya said this was a brainwave resonance device that could amplify the neural signals in the abnormal area of my temporal lobe. But at this moment, the blue light was like a red-hot iron rod, drilling into my skull. "Relax, Evan." Her voice was like frosted glass. "You need to reconnect those repressed memory nodes." I stared at the swinging fluorescent lights on the ceiling, and my vision gradually blurred. Goosebumps appeared on the back of the neck, which was a sign before the whisper of the dead was activated. But this time it was different. It was not the memory fragments of the deceased, but my own. A night of blood and fire that had been sealed in the folds of my brain for 20 years. The pain suddenly exploded. I saw my hands, the hands of a 5-year-old child, with wall dust embedded in the gaps between my fingernails. The crystal chandelier in the living room was shaking, and my mother's pearl necklace was scattered on the ground, and each bead was stained with blood. She was kneeling on the ground, her white dress soaked in dark red, grabbing my ankles and screaming, "Run!
Go find old Bob."
Evan." A hoarse voice came from behind. I wanted to look back, but my body was pulled up uncontrollably. The man's arms were like iron hoops, and the smell of tobacco mixed with rust rushed into his nostrils. I kicked the corner of the coffee table, and the glass ashtray smashed to the ground. The fragments pierced my calf, and I cried out in pain. The mother rushed over, scratching the man's wrist with her nails, leaving bloody marks, but he shook her off like a rag, and the back of her head hit the fireplace with a dull thud. "Mom," I screamed and reached for her hanging hands, but the person covered my eyes with his hands. In the darkness I heard my mother's last sob, the crackle of flames licking the curtains, and the sound of sirens coming from afar, then the sound of car doors opening and closing, and tires rolling over gravel. "Go to sleep." The man's breath sprayed behind my ear. "When you wake up, you won't remember anything." My consciousness was suddenly pulled back to reality. I sat up suddenly, and the instrument on my forehead fell to the ground with a bang. Tanya's white coat was stained with my cold sweat, and she was holding my wrist. The pulse meter was beating wildly. "You saw it." Her voice was trembling. She didn't sound like a doctor, but rather like a madman who finally got the experimental data. "Who was the man who took you away?" I didn't answer. The self in the mirror made me gasp. There were fine lines at the corners of my eyes, and my temples were silvery white. It was clear that only 10 minutes had passed, but I looked 10 years older. This is the price of Whisper of the Dead, but it's even harder this time because I'm mining my own memories, not those of the dead. The phone vibrated in my pocket. It was Leah, calling. There was a lot of noise in the background, mixed with the sound of things breaking. Evan, come to the police station as soon as possible. Her voice was as tight as a string. My dad is here. When we arrived at the police station, the vase at the front desk was broken on the ground, and half of the duty roster was soaked in water. The door to the director's office was open, and Leah's father, Colonel Crawford Sr., was tapping on her desk with his cane. The old man was wearing a neatly ironed army uniform, with his shoulder straps gleaming coldly under the light. Do you know who you are dealing with? That boy is a disaster. 20 years ago, his whole family died in a fire, and now people are starting to die in Grey Harbor again. Do you want to get yourself involved? Dad, he's investigating a case. Investigating a case. Old Crawford turned to me, his cloudy eyes like two knives. I've seen too many people like this in Vietnam. They think they can see through people's hearts, but in the end, not only do they get themselves involved, they also drag the people around them down with them. Your mother was killed by this kind of arrogance. Have you forgotten? Leah's face turned pale instantly. I remembered she mentioned that her mother was shot while chasing a drug dealer 10 years ago, just as her father was transferred out of Grey Harbor. At this moment, her knuckles were blue from gripping the edge of the table. Her throat moved, but she said nothing. Colonel, I took a half step forward. I understand you're worried about Leah, but don't call me Colonel. He stabbed my foot with his cane. You're not qualified. When your house caught fire 20 years ago, the whole town said it was your dad who was drunk and set the fire. Now you come back with some damn mind-reading ability and make Grey Harbor even more chaotic. Last Wednesday, old Jenkins' grocery store was smashed, and yesterday the city hall received a threatening letter, saying it was because you investigated the case too harshly. That was Victor Marlowe instigating this. Leah finally spoke. At his charity dinner, some people held up a sign that said, "Restore peace to Grey Harbor." Those people were volunteers from his foundation. That's enough. Old Crawford's chest rose and fell violently. I came here today to tell you that you can either quit as sheriff and come back to Chicago with me, or he glanced at me, never enter my house again. The office suddenly became quiet. The ticking of the wall clock became deafening. Leah looked at her father with a fragility in her eyes that I had never seen before. She reached out and touched the back of the old man's hand and whispered, "Dad, I swore to protect this town." Old Crawford stared at her as if she were a strange child. Finally, he tore off the medal on his chest and threw it on the table with a clang. "Okay, you continue to be your hero. When you end up in the morgue, don't expect me to collect your body." When he turned around, the heel of his army boot hit the door frame with a sound like a gunshot. Leah chased after me for 2 steps, then stopped and turned her back to me. I saw her shoulders shaking, but I didn't hear any crying. "Need me?" "No need." She sniffed and turned around, already putting on the cold mask of sheriff. Barney just said that the city hall received 20 joint letters requesting a suspension of the investigation. Victor's people set up a donation booth in the town square, saying they wanted to seek justice for the victims' families. She loosened her tie. What's more troublesome is that old Bob's grandson came to identify the body today. He said that his grandfather was holding half a photo before he died, and there was a man wearing a bow tie on it. Bow tie? I thought of the man who took me away in my memory. His suit collar was shining silver. Is it silver, like butterfly wings? Leah's pupils shrank. How do you know? I didn't answer. The phone vibrated at this moment. It was a message from Tanya. There is a problem with the laboratory monitoring. Please come back as soon as possible. When we returned to the old hospital, it was already dark. Tanya stood at the door of the laboratory, holding the surveillance hard drive in her hand, her face paler than the fluorescent light. At 3:17 p.m., All cameras showed snow. She called up the video and the screen was full of noise. But the temperature sensor shows that a stranger entered the laboratory between 2 and 4 o'clock. I walked in, and the smell of disinfectant was mixed with a faint smell of tobacco. Exactly the same smell as the man in my memory. On the floor in front of the glass cabinet, there was half a shoe print, size 42, with a diamond pattern on the sole, just like the leather shoes that Victor wore when he asked Amy to take the box in old Bob's memory. "Evan?" Tanya touched my arm. I looked up and out the window. A dark shadow flashed in the abandoned radiology building opposite. The moonlight shone on the glass, reflecting a little silver light. The reflection of the bow tie. Lock the door. I pulled out my gun. Call Leah and ask her to bring backup. Tanya's hands were shaking and she dropped her phone. The surveillance screen suddenly lit up, and a face emerged from the noise. It was Victor. His smile was as elegant as in the interrogation room, and his lips moved as he said silently, "Welcome home, Evan." I stared at Victor's smiling face on the surveillance screen, and my back teeth were sore from biting them. Tanya's cell phone broke into 2 pieces on the ground. When I bent down to pick it up, my knuckles turned white from the force. The stormy night 20 years ago suddenly flashed back on my retina. I huddled in the closet, and through the gap I saw the man in diamond-checkered leather shoes squatting down and knocking on the closet door with his bloody fingers. "Evan." Leah's voice came from the corridor. She must have come because of Tanya's missed call. The sound of her leather boots echoed in the empty old hospital. When I turned around, the ceiling light in the laboratory suddenly flickered, and the cold white light fell on her police badge, making my eyes hurt. "He's been here." I pointed to the shoe prints in front of the glass cabinet and sniffed. The smell of tobacco, the same as the one on Victor and old Bob's memory. Leah squatted down to look at the shoe prints, her ponytail brushing across the back of her hand. She paused when she felt the pattern on the sole. Diamond check. Same pair Barney wore to the town hall meeting last week. My throat tightened. Barney is an old detective in Grey Harbor. When I came back to investigate a case, he always told me, young people shouldn't be too radical. But last week in the morgue, he blocked me from looking at the ankle of the third body. Now that I think about it, that body had the same butterfly-shaped birthmark on its ankle as the one in Leah's family tree. They're working together. As Leah stood up, the holster scraped against the lab table, and the sound of metal collision was like a needle piercing her eardrum. She took out her phone and looked through the photos. It was an old map of the basement of the city hall. I found it when I was cleaning up the archives last week. There are abandoned steam pipes underground in Grey Harbor, connecting the old factory and the church. Victor's Charity Foundation headquarters is located at the site of the old factory. I touched the watch in my pocket. This is the price I pay for using Whisper of the Dead. Every time I read my memory, the watch hands will jump 1 tick counterclockwise. Now it has stopped at 3 o'clock. According to the doctor, my biological age is approaching 60, but at this moment, the adrenaline rushing up made the dull pain in the joints become blurred. Take the initiative. I put the surveillance hard drive into the inner pocket of my coat. They think we are still passively tracking, but we should have blocked this line long ago. Leah nodded, her fingertips swiping quickly on the screen of her mobile phone, calling up the inventory of weapons. I will let the newcomers in the bureau guard the exit of the hospital and meet in the back alley of the old factory in half an hour. The night is like a ball of ink that cannot be dissolved. When our police car turned around the third abandoned warehouse, raindrops suddenly fell, hitting the windshield with a crackling sound. Leah turned off the car lights and used the moonlight to identify the road signs. The rusty sign of the old factory was looming in the rain and fog, and 3 of the 4 letters of Huigang Steel had fallen off, leaving only the crooked word steel. Remember the fire in 1987? Leah parked the car behind the bushes, the windshield wipers drawing 2 muddy arcs on the glass. At the time it was said to be a circuit failure, but my father's notes said that someone witnessed a man wearing diamond-shaped leather shoes running out of the warehouse. Her voice suddenly lowered. My father died that year, falling from a building. The police said it was an accident. I gripped the door handle. The rain was getting heavier and heavier, and there was a sound of metal friction outside the car, like something being dragged across the ground. Leah drew out her pistol, and the click of the safety catch was particularly clear in the enclosed space. As we moved along the wall toward the factory side door, my right eyelid twitched violently. This was a sign before the whisper of the dead was activated, but there were no bodies nearby. Could it be? The side door was ajar, with a dim light leaking through the gap. Leah mouthed the count of 3 and kicked the door open. I rushed in and the damp smell of rust mixed with gunpowder hit me in the face. There was an old-fashioned projector on the iron stand in the center, and a photo was projected on the screen. A woman in a floral dress, holding a baby, with the old church in Grey Harbor in the background. That was Victor's deceased wife and their stillborn child. "Welcome." Victor's voice came from the second floor. He leaned against the railing, his bow tie gleaming silver in the dim light. "Evan, you finally came to see the home I built for her." Barney stood behind him, the gun in his hand pointed at our temples. The twitching in the corner of my eye suddenly intensified. There was a noise behind the abandoned shelves on the right, and 3 men holding iron bars walked out from the shadows. Leah pointed her gun at Barney, but Barney kept his gun pointed steadily at me. He knew that Leah would not risk my life. "It's been 20 years and you're still obsessed with that woman?" I raised my voice deliberately and caught a glimpse of Leah's thumb trembling slightly on the handle of the gun. That was the secret signal we agreed on. She was calculating the angle. Victor's smile froze for a moment, and his fingers dug into the railing. When she died, she was pregnant with our second child. It was those nosy policemen and gossipy neighbors who forced her to jump off the church roof. Barney behind him suddenly started coughing, and veins bulged on the back of his hands. I then noticed that Barney's collar revealed a half butterfly-shaped birthmark, exactly the same as the one on the ankle of the deceased, and in Leah's family tree. "Your father was the captain of the arson team." I stared at Barney's red eyes. "He set the fire in 1987 to destroy the evidence of Victor's smuggling." Barney's gun shook. Victor turned his head sharply and pounded on the railing with his fist. "Shut up."
You don't know the pain of losing a loved one. He took out a metal device from his suit's inner pocket. The surface was engraved with the same butterfly pattern as Leah's family tree. "This is a steam bomb, connected to the underground pipelines of the entire town." If I flipped the switch, he held the device up to the light. "Greyhaven will be Pompeii." Leah's breath hitched. I can hear my own heartbeat, like beating on a broken drum. Rainwater dripped down the eaves, forming small puddles on the ground, reflecting the shadow of the second floor. In Victor's shadow, a thinner silhouette was moving. "Do you think you can scare us with such an old-fashioned threat?" I curled the corners of my mouth and deliberately staggered a step, letting the coat slide off my shoulders. The pocket watch fell to the ground and the glass shattered into a spider web. The moment Victor's attention was attracted, Leah had already raised her gun, and the bullet grazed Barney's ear and hit the wall. In the chaos, 3 men with iron rods rushed over. I pulled out the dagger hidden in my boot with my backhand. When the blade cut the first person's wrist, there was a crisp sound from my aging knee. This body can't hold on any longer. Leah's baton hit the second man's elbow, and the sound of bones dislocating mixed with the sound of rain reminded me of the sound of a scalpel cutting through ribs in the morgue. I rushed over when the third man's iron rod hit Leah on the back of her neck. A sharp pain exploded from my back, and I heard a slight crack in my ribs. But I grabbed his wrist and put the dagger to his throat. "Stop, or I'll let you taste the feeling of having your throat cut." "Evan!" Leah's scream pierced through the rain. I looked up and saw Victor holding the steam bomb, and Barney's gun pointed at Leah's heart. And beside Victor, there appeared a figure, Tanya. She was wearing a white coat, holding a silver box in her arms, and had a smile on her face that I had never seen before. "I'm sorry, Evan.
Her voice was like a knife dipped in honey. "We have already studied your abilities thoroughly." The rain poured into my collar and it was freezing cold. Victor's finger hovered over the bomb switch and Tanya's box hummed with electricity. Leah's gun was still pointed at Barney, but Barney's gun was now pointed at me, and my pocket watch stopped it. The rain poured down the brim of my hat, into my eyes. I blinked, and the figures in my sight were covered with a curtain of water. Tanya's white coat was soaked by the rain and stuck to her back like a faded cloud. 3 days ago, she was sitting in the clinic, tapping her pen on the medical record and saying, "Evan, your temporal lobe abnormality requires continued observation." Now the silver box in her arms was beeping, like something alive. "Tanya." Leah's voice trembled, and her baton was still dripping with blood, the blood of the 2 minions just now. Barney's gun moved between me and Leah. His Adam's apple moved, and the rain flowed down the wrinkles of his chin. Mr. Marlowe said this is for the good of Greyhaven. Victor smiled. He was dressed in a suit and tie, which made him look even more refined in the rain, like an old pocket watch that had been carefully wiped. The brass shell of the steam bomb shone coldly, and his thumb was pressed on the switch engraved with a rose pattern. That was the coat of arms of his late wife, which I had seen in the files 20 years ago.
"Evan, you always call me a hypocrite." His voice was mixed with the sound of rain. "But now you are the one gambling with the lives of the whole town." The wound on my back was burning, and I couldn't count how many ribs were broken. I just knew that every breath I took felt like broken glass piercing my lungs. The pocket watch hurt my skin in my pocket. It was 2:17, exactly the same time it stopped when I first used Whisper of the Dead. Tanya said they studied my abilities thoroughly. Could it be device? I sneered deliberately, blood foam seeping from the corners of my mouth. "Do you think I will believe it? 20 years ago you burned my house in the name of purification, and now you use destroying the town as an excuse." I stared at Victor's fingers. The force he pressed the switch was changing, and the blood vessels at the base of his thumb were beating too frequently. "This piece of scrap copper and iron is not even steaming. I'm afraid you picked it up from the scrapyard." Victor's pupils shrank into pinpoints. He hated being questioned the most, especially by someone like me, the little bastard who escaped the net back then. Sure enough, he pulled the chain of the bomb and shook it, and rain splashed on the brass surface. "Look at this pressure valve. The double piston imported from Germany can blow the entire dock area into slag." He suddenly paused, realizing that he had said too much. Leah tapped the ground with her toes, which was the code we trained in the FBI. Prepare to raid. I pretended to stagger, and my right hand secretly reached for the spare dagger in my boot, the one that was just against the throat of the third henchman, who had fainted from the pain. "If your wife knew you were like this now," I continued to stab him. "She shouted your name in the fire, right?" Victor's face turned pale instantly. His late wife died in a warehouse fire 20 years ago, the same day as my family was murdered. The fire records from that year showed that there were 2 sets of footprints at the fire scene. One set was my father's, and the other set was— "Shut up," he roared and raised the bomb, rain running down his temples into his collar. At that moment, Leah's baton brushed past Barney's wrist, and the old detective's gun clanged into the mud. I took the opportunity to pounce on Victor, and my dagger cut open the front of his suit, but stopped when it touched his skin. There was a metal plate on his chest, with the same pattern as the one on Tanya's box. "Be careful." Leah's warning was a little late. Barney pulled a second gun, an old Colt from his waistband, and pointed it at Leah's knees. I spun around and pushed her away. The bullet flew past my ear, and the hot air wave burned my skin. Victor took the opportunity to break free, and the steam bomb hit my shoulder, causing me to see black due to the pain. In the chaos, Tanya's box suddenly made a sharp buzzing sound. She opened the lid of the box very gently, as if she was opening a box of jewelry, but the contents inside made my blood freeze.
It was a silver instrument with dark brown marks on the electrodes, which were human brain tissue. You said you would help me control my abilities. My voice was trembling. 3 months ago, I collapsed drunk in front of her clinic. She was the one who bandaged me, listened to me talk about the side effects of Whisper of the Dead, and said maybe it can be improved through neuroregulation. It turns out that she had been collecting my brainwave data since then.
Why do you think I ask you to do an MRI every week? She stroked her fingers across the instrument's operating panel. Your temporal lobe abnormality can receive residual brain waves. But you know what? She looked up at me, her eyes flashing with the same madness as Victor's. We can amplify this reception and let you hear the screams of all the dead. Victor's laughter mixed with the sound of rain. Now hand over the evidence you found, and Tanya can shut down this loudspeaker. Otherwise, everyone who has died in Grey Harbor will be resurrected in your mind until you go crazy. I reached for the USB drive in my pocket, which contained bank statements from 20 years ago, showing that Victor's charity foundation was transferring money to the cleanup team. But Leah suddenly grabbed my wrist. Her hand was cold as ice. He's lying. She stared at Victor's bomb. The needle on the pressure valve didn't move. This thing didn't work. Barney raised his gun again, this time aiming at Leah's temple. Don't push me, Hastings. His voice was shaking. My father was just following orders. Before he died, he said that the fire was to protect the townspeople. Protect? I yelled. My mother held me in the attic. Smoke was coming up through the cracks in the floorboards. The last thing she said was, Evan, close your eyes. My throat was fishy. Your father is protecting the secrets of you powerful people. Victor suddenly rushed towards Leah, and the edge of the bomb hit her waist. She groaned and hit his knee with the baton, but he grabbed her wrist. As I rushed over, Tanya's instrument made a crackling sound of electricity, and something drilled into my brain. Was it a baby crying? No, it was the screams in the fire, the sound of my mother coughing due to the thick smoke on that rainy night, 20 years ago. Evan, Leah kicked Victor in the calf, and he stumbled and hit a rusty iron barrel. Barney's gun went off, and the bullet hit the mud at my feet. I picked up the iron bar on the ground and hit Barney's wrist with it. The old detective screamed in pain and let go, and the gun fell into the gutter. In the chaos, Tanya's shadow suddenly flashed across my peripheral vision. She rushed towards Victor's steam bomb, with the box in her arms, the hem of her white coat covered in mud, like a moth to a flame. Victor yelled something, but the rain was so loud that I could only hear him mouth, "Don't touch that." My temples were throbbing, and the screams in my head were becoming clearer and clearer. My mother, Victor's late wife, and all the people they had killed. Tanya's hand was on the switch of the bomb. She turned back to look at me, the smile on her lips colder than the rain. "It's time to show you what the real Whisper of the Dead looks like." The rain poured into my collar and ran down my spine. I heard Leah yelling my name and saw Victor lunging at Tanya and Barney groping in the mud for his gun. And my pocket watch suddenly started moving. The second hand moved backwards, and every time it moved a wrinkle appeared on the back of my neck. The moment Tanya's finger pressed the switch, the sound of the whole world disappeared. Only countless faces appeared in my mind. Their mouths opened, blood foamed in their throats, and they said in a voice that I was familiar with, "Evan, save me." I was kneeling in the mud when the tinnitus receded like the tide. The rain flowed down my eyelashes, blurring my vision. The world had been muted for a moment, and now all the sounds came rushing back. Leah's panting, Victor's roar, the clatter of Barney fumbling for his gun in the gutter. The metal casing of the steam device shone coldly in the rain. Tanya's hand was still on the switch, and the cuffs of her white coat were soaked black by the rain. I stared at the brass button. The expected explosion did not happen, and there was not even a hissing sound of steam leaking. Victor's face was twisted into a grayish blue in the rain. He staggered towards Tanya. The hem of his suit was stained with mud, like a peacock with its feathers ripped off. "Are you crazy? What's in it?"
It's tap water mixed with rust. Tanya interrupted him, and when her fingertips lifted from the switch, she revealed the red tape underneath. Mr. Marlowe, do you think you can scare the profiler with this pile of junk? Those pressure gauges were bought from the second-hand market, the high-concentration gas in the fuel tank. I smelled it when I helped the community repair the boiler last week. It was the smell of turpentine mixed with alcohol. Victor's Adam's apple moved, and the rain flowed down his carefully groomed silver hair. Only then did I notice that the "Don't touch that," he shouted just now, actually had a tremor in his voice. It turned out that this old fox who had controlled Grey Harbor Town for 20 years actually believed that this pile of junk was a bomb. You've been fooled. Tanya turned to look at me, and Leah, the smile on her lips was like a knife scraping across glass. From the moment the first body was found in the morgue, Marlowe and Barney were puppets. The real chess players don't even know their names. Leah's police badge flashed in the rain. She wiped the water off her face and reached for the gun at her waist with her right hand. An organization that doesn't even have a code name in the FBI files. Tanya's voice was very low, mixed with the sound of rain, and drilled into my ears. They are looking for a container that can carry the consciousness of the dead. And you, Evan, she suddenly stared into my eyes. Your temporal lobe abnormality is not a defect. It is the key they are looking for. In the murder case 20 years ago, your parents' bodies were moved 3 times. Do you know why? My temple was throbbing. Fragments of memory suddenly came flooding back. My mother's hands in the fire, my father's bloody face pressed under the beam, and a man in rubber gloves squatting in front of me, prying open my eyelids with tweezers. They are testing your endurance, Tanya said. Every time you use Whisper of the Dead, it's not just your body that ages, but also the barrier in your brain that prevents memory overload. Now the barrier is about to break, so you will hear so many voices, not just the last moments of the dead, but their entire lives, their complete pain. Barney's gun went off. This time the bullet grazed Aaliyah's shoulder and burned a charred hole in her police uniform. The old detective climbed out of the gutter, his face covered with moss, the gun in his hand still dripping with water. Bitch, you think you can betray us? When your father went to prison, who paid your tuition? Victor took the opportunity to pounce on Tanya and strangled her neck with his skinny fingers. I picked up the iron rod on the ground and rushed over, but Barney kicked me on the knee. A sharp pain shot up my leg bone, and I stumbled into the steam device. The metal shell made a hollow echo. Just as Tanya said, it was empty inside. Leah's tactical flashlight hit Barney on the back of the neck. The old detective grunted and his gun dropped at my feet. I bent down to pick it up, and out of the corner of my eye, I saw Tanya being pressed on the device by Victor, with half of a silver device sticking out of the pocket of her white coat. It was a miniature recorder, not much bigger than a matchbox. Catch him, Leah yelled. When I looked up, Barney had already pulled out a hunting knife from his boot, the blade gleaming coldly in the rain. I used the iron rod to block his attack, and the crisp sound of the metal collision made my palm numb. This old fellow had been a Marine when he was young. He was ruthless and quick with his knife. I was quickly stabbed in the left shoulder, and warm blood mixed with rainwater flowed down. Evan, Leah's voice trembled. I turned around and saw Victor pinching Tanya's wrist and stuffing something into her mouth. Poison? Or a sedative? Tanya's nails scratched bloody marks on the back of his hand, but her mouth was still pried open. I gritted my teeth and pushed Barney away, hitting him on the wrist with the iron rod. The hunting knife fell to the ground with a clang. He covered his wrist and took 2 steps back, bumping into a wooden rack where scrap was piled. The wooden frame shook, and several pieces of rusty steel bars fell down, trapping him inside. Taking advantage of this gap, I rushed towards Tanya. Victor saw me, let go of my hand and stepped back. His tie pulled askew around his neck. Tanya collapsed on the ground and coughed. I noticed that the recorder in her pocket was more obviously exposed. I reached out and pulled it, and the metal shell hurt my palm. The password is my birthday. Tanya wiped the blood from the corner of her mouth and suddenly smiled. March 12th, 1987, the day your parents were murdered. I was stunned for a moment. He hurriedly turned on the recorder, and the moment the blue screen lit up, he could hear a vague conversation. A man's whisper mixed with the hum of the instrument. Hastings' child has an abnormal temporal lobe and can withstand multiple memory superpositions. More experimental subjects are needed. After Marlowe's wife died of brain death, the memory retention rate was 30. Turn it off. Victor rushed over. I dodged sideways, and he bumped into the steam device, leaving a bloody bump on his forehead. Leah took the opportunity to lock his arms, and the handcuffs clicked shut. But Barney had already crawled out from under the steel. He picked up half a brick and hit Leah on the back of her head. I wanted to shout, but my throat felt like it was being gripped. The pocket watch was vibrating wildly in my pocket, and the sound of the second hand turning backwards drowned out the sound of the rain. I lifted up my clothes and saw that the skin on the back of my neck was wrinkled like dried orange peel, and it was full of wrinkles when I touched it with my fingertips. The whispers of the dead surged up uncontrollably. Barney's memory fragments exploded. On the winter night of 1995, he stood by the fire in my house in police uniform, with a half bottle of whiskey in his pocket. 20 years later, he was repositioning bodies in the morgue, with preservative fluid on his gloves. And early this morning, he met a man in a baseball cap at the dock, who handed him a black USB flash drive. "Leah," I yelled. The moment she turned around, Barney's brick hit the wall, brushing her ear, and the gravel splashed all over my face. I rushed over and hugged Barney's waist, and we both rolled into the mud. His fists rained down on my back, and I gritted my teeth as I felt the old scar on the back of his neck. It was left from his Marine Corps training, where he would lose his balance every time he was pressed. Barney groaned and his body went limp for a moment. I took the opportunity to choke him by the neck until he rolled his eyes and passed out. When she looked up, Leah was pointing a gun at Victor, whose suit was soaked through, like a plucked old bird. Tanya stood up with the help of the device. Her white coat was covered with mud. She stared at the recorder in my hand, her eyes as if she was looking at a fragile object. "It contains their 3 years of experimental records, including your parents, but don't think that just getting this will end it." In the distance came the roar of a car engine. There was not just one car, but many cars, and the sound came from the road in the direction of the dock. Leah walked over to the broken window, rain dripping down her holster. 3 SUVs, all with their lights off. My pocket watch is still running backwards. The wrinkles on the back of my neck have already spread behind my ears. The me in the mirror looks probably about 50 years old. Tanya stared at my neck and suddenly said, "They're faster than I thought. Remember, Evan, the real danger is not Marlowe, not Barney, but the man who can make the dead speak." She was interrupted by the loud bang of a metal door being smashed open. The white light of the flashlight pierced through the rain curtain, illuminating the shadows of more than a dozen people holding guns. The leader was wearing gloves and a black hood over his face, with his gun pointed in our direction. "Put down your weapons." Leah pushed Victor behind me. I held the recorder tightly, and the rain flowed through my fingers. The vibration of the pocket watch pressed against my chest through my shirt, like a heart about to explode. "Run," Leah asked in a low voice. I looked at the shadows with guns raised, then at the unconscious Barney in my arms, and at Victor, who was handcuffed. The rain was getting heavier and heavier, and the car lights in the distance merged into one, like a glowing snake crawling towards this side. "No." I touched the wrinkles on the back of my neck. "We should let them see who the real dead is." As the last word was drowned out by the sound of gunfire, I pressed the play button on the recorder. Rainwater seeped through the cracks in the tin roof, creating muddy puddles on the concrete floor. I wiped the raindrops from my face and glanced at the tilted shelves in the stronghold. This was originally an abandoned warehouse supermarket, but now it has become our cage. Men wearing black hoods held tactical flashlights, the beams cutting flickering spots of light on the wall. 7 men approached in a fan-shaped formation, 3 of them holding shotguns, and the other 4 holding semi-automatic rifles. Their combat boots made a crisp sound as they stepped on the broken glass. They're wearing Kevlar tactical gloves, Leah whispered in my ear. Her Glock 17 pressed against the outside of her thigh. This isn't an ordinary gang fight. Their equipment is better than the town police department's. She tapped the back of my hand with her fingers. This was the code we used when we were FBI agents. Pay attention to the enemy's coordination pattern. I squinted my eyes and saw that the 2 people on the far left paused slightly, and the leader on the right subconsciously turned his head. They were waiting for some instructions, but there was only electrical noise in the communicator. Lack of unified command, I whispered, glancing at Victor, who was handcuffed to a shelf by Leah. The old philanthropist bow tie was crooked to his collarbone, and his glasses were cracked into spider webs, but he was still smiling. Mr. Hastings, you should know that these people are just hounds who are paid to do things. His eyes swept over Barney, who was slumped in the corner. The old detective had a lump as big as an egg on his temple. He was knocked unconscious by Leah with a fire extinguisher. And hounds always like to bite their trainers. The pocket watch vibrated even more violently against my chest. The skin on the back of my neck felt like it was being rubbed with sandpaper, and I could feel the protruding joints behind my ears. Every time I use Whisper of the Dead, my biological age goes back 1 hour. But this time, in order to read Barney's father's memories from 20 years ago, I have overdrawn by at least 6 hours. The me in the mirror now should be 55 years old, with bloodshot eyes like spider webs, and my knees making a cracking sound every time I bend. Take Victor and Barney hostage. I squeezed Leah's wrist. Their employer wants them alive, otherwise he would have shot them. Leah nodded and suddenly raised her voice. Stop. If you move any closer, I'll shoot Marlowe in the head. She pressed the muzzle of her gun against Victor's temple, and the sound of metal collision was particularly harsh in the empty supermarket. The man wearing a black hood in the front indeed stopped. The leader's tactical vest was embroidered with a faded ranger badge. His Adam's apple moved. The higher-ups want us alive, including Marlowe and Barney. He spoke with a Michigan accent. If you lay down your weapons, we promise not to kill. Fuck your promise, I interrupted him, hooking the beer bottle at my feet with my toes. The pain of glass fragments piercing my feet woke me up. I stared at the leader's Adam's apple, which is the weakness of all gunmen. Leah, the third one from the left. The butt of his gun is not against his shoulder, I muttered to myself, calculating the time difference in the rhythm of rain hitting the ground. The first shot was fired by Leah. Her Glock pistol fired, almost grazing Victor's ear, and the bullet shattered the tactical flashlight of the gunman on the leader's right. Darkness instantly swallowed up half of the encirclement, and I took the opportunity to throw the beer bottle, not at people, but at the ventilation duct on the ceiling. The rusty iron sheet fell down with a crash, hitting the heads of the 2 gunmen on the right. Their guns went off accidentally, and bullets hit the shelves, knocking cans down like hail. Go to the back warehouse. I pulled Leah's arm and ran deeper into the supermarket. Victor staggered because of the handcuffs, but he was still smiling. Smart choice, Mr. Hastings. They want to kill him alive, so they won't use heavy weapons. Barney woke up with a groan in the back, and I kicked him in the back. Either help or be shot to death. Choose one. The old detective picked up the shotgun on the ground with a curse, but pointed the muzzle at us hesitantly. Don't be stupid. Leah turned around and glared at him. Your son's body is still in the morgue. Do you think they will leave him alive for someone who knows about it? Barney's finger trembled on the trigger, and finally turned the gun and fired at the man in the black hood who was chasing him. The shotgun shells hit the shelf, sending wood chips flying everywhere. but it forced the other party to squat temporarily. By the time we retreated to the rear warehouse door, we had already knocked down 3 enemies. Leah kicked open the rusty iron door, revealing several boxes of expired cleaning agents and a rusty safe. I put the recorder into Victor's arms. "What's the password?" He raised his eyebrows. "Do you think I know?" I took out the pen I searched from Barney and put the tip of the pen against his wrist vein. 20 years ago, the matchbox you left at the murder scene had the number on the back that was your wife's birthday. September 17th, right? Victor's pupils suddenly contracted. I remember that in the old sheriff's memory, the female corpse with her throat cut was holding half a match in her hand, and 919 was written in pen on the back of the matchbox.
9174, I punched in. Your wife died in a car accident on Highway 4, correct?
The moment the safe opened with a click, the sound of glass breaking was heard outside. I pulled out the silver USB drive and inserted it into the recorder. The screen lit up with a blood-red warning. Biometrics required.
Fuck.
Leah pressed her face against the door. They've moved the barricades and blocked all the exits. 5 minutes left. 5 minutes at most. I stared at the fingerprint lock of the recorder and suddenly remembered what Tanya said before. The real danger is someone who can make the dead speak. She was now huddled in the corner, hugging her shoulders and looking at us, her eyes as if she was looking at a test subject. I hooked my finger at her. "Come here. You need my fingerprints." She came over, tapping her heels. "But you know, Evan, I belong to them." "No," I grabbed her wrist and pressed her finger into the identification area. "You belong to yourself." The moment the screen lit up, a video began playing. The picture shows the dome of the Grey Harbor Town Hall. The camera moves down and scans the flowers and red carpet that are being arranged. Tomorrow is the 20th anniversary celebration party of the town's reconstruction, and all the dignitaries in the town will be present. The male voice in the video has an electronic tone. At 0 o'clock, the gas pipeline will leak, and sparks will ignite the entire dome. When the flames rise, all the account ducts, testimonies, surveillance videos will disappear in the ashes. They're going to destroy all the evidence. Leah's voice was tense, including files from 20 years ago, and clues to the recent serial case. Victor suddenly laughed. "So you're going to the town hall? Do you think you can make it in time, Mr. Hastings?" His handcuffs rattled, and I shut up. I tore off the USB drive and stuffed it into my trouser pocket. "Leah, go get the gas can in the back compartment." "Barney, you're responsible for distracting their attention." "Why?" Barney stiffened his neck. "Because I have your daughter's diary." I lied. "She wrote about the cash you hid in the wall of the garage, and the shot your father fired in the murder case." Barney's face turned pale, and he grabbed the shotgun and rushed out. I heard his angry roar from outside. "You bastards! I know your boss's secret." The sound of gunfire and shouting mixed together, and I took the opportunity to pour gasoline on the shelf. Leah lit a match, and the flame leaped up, casting a flickering shadow on Tanya's face. "It's time to go." Leah pulled me, but Tanya suddenly moved. She moved so quickly that it was unlike anything a psychiatrist could do. I didn't even see how she got the recorder. It was right at my feet. She stuffed the recorder into her coat pocket and shouted to the man in the black hood at the door. "The target is running." "Bitch." Leah raised the gun, but I held down her wrist. There was no fear in Tanya's eyes, only excitement. "Evan, do you think I'm helping you for justice? What I want is your temporal lobe data, the secret of Whisper of the Dead." She retreated to the door and mixed into the team of people wearing black hoods. "Tell the people in the city hall that their party will have special guests." The pocket watch was incredibly hot against my chest, and I touched the back of my neck, where the skin had begun to loosen. Rainwater poured in through the broken door and extinguished several flames. Leah squeezed the back of my hand, and we looked at each other. Now we not only had to stop the gas explosion, but also had to get the recorder back from Tanya. What's even more troublesome is the special guest she just mentioned. I looked in the direction where Tanya disappeared. My throat tightened. It may not be a person. The gunshots outside suddenly became more frequent, mixed with Barney's screams. Leah loaded her gun. Shall we go? I touched the USB drive in my inner pocket, where all the incriminating evidence was stored. Let's go, I said. But first we need to let them experience what it's like to be chased by the dead. The hands of the pocket watch went backwards faster, and I could hear my joints cracking. In the rain, the spire of the city hall was looming, like a tombstone that might collapse at any time. Behind us, Tanya's laughter mixed with the sound of sirens were spreading along the wet street. Rainwater poured in through the broken door, forming dark red puddles at my feet. That was Barney's blood from the stray bullet that had just hit him, mixed with the lingering sparks on the ground, steaming up a few wisps of burnt mist. Leah's butt of the gun rested against my shoulder, and her breath swept past my ear, bringing with it the cool smell of mint candy, completely different from the smell of cheap tobacco on those minions outside. 12 people. She lowered her voice and gently touched the barrel of her gun to my palm. 3 on the left are holding shotguns. The 4 on the right are holding modified Glocks, and the one in the middle wearing a peaked cap. She paused. Has a miniature bomb on his waist, the same model as the one on the gas pipeline 20 minutes ago. I narrowed my eyes. Through the rain-stained glass window, Tanya could be seen standing behind a black Dodge, the metal casing of the recorder glowing coldly in her palm. She had knocked over the gasoline barrel when she was snatching it just now, and now the oil stains at her feet were flowing along the ground towards us, mixed with rainwater, and accumulated into a shiny black mirror at her feet. But her eyes didn't stay on us for long. Instead, she kept glancing to the right. There stood Victor's personal bodyguard, the big guy who always wore a gold chain around his neck. At this moment he was stroking his chin and staring at what she held in her hand. The pocket watch burned like a red-hot coal against my chest. I touched the back of my neck. The skin was so loose that it formed wrinkles 2 fingers wide. This was the price I paid for using Whisper of the Dead 3 times in a row. The last time I read the tramp's memories in the old church, it only turned half of my hair white. Now it feels like there's a rusty saw stuck in my joints, and they squeak with every movement.
What are they waiting for? Leah's gun barrel suddenly tightened. Tanya's people should have back up. Barney's shout just now.
Not back up. I stared at Tanya's suddenly tense mouth. She unconsciously clenched the recorder with her right hand, her knuckles turning white. It's an insider. Victor and Barney's people didn't intend to let her take it all for herself. There was a metallic grinding sound from the right. The corners of Victor's suit pants brushed against the broken bricks. He stood behind a broken wall 5 meters away from us. His gold-rimmed glasses were misted over, but he still looked me in the eye accurately. This old fox who always pinned the invitation to the charity dinner on the lapel of his suit now had the diamond cufflinks on his collar flashing in the firelight, like some kind of dangerous signal.
Mr. Hastings. His voice was like a knife dipped in honey. You said Tanya would run away if she took the recorder?
She even looks at you as if you are a stumbling block. I licked my bitter lips and deliberately raised my voice so that every word could be heard with the sound of rain. The videotape of the family murder case 20 years ago, Miss Marlowe's last words before her death, and the documents you signed in the basement of City Hall. I parted the USB flash drive in my inner pocket. If all these things are exposed, you will grow tomatoes in prison for at most 20 years. But if you let Tanya take it away... I paused. The laboratory behind her once living samples. Do you think she will keep your lives? Barney's breathing suddenly became heavy. The old detective who always engraved "World's Best Dad" on his coffee cup had his fat face twitching at this moment. I saw it in his partner's dying memory. On that rainy night 20 years ago, he was the one who smashed the lock of my attic with a baton. Then what do you say we should do? He roared, and the muzzle of the shotgun shifted slightly. "We can't cooperate with you two dogs. It's better than being sliced." Leah suddenly sneered, and the crisp sound of her heels rolling over a piece of broken glass attracted everyone's attention. "In 3 seconds, I will shoot at the oil stains at Tanya's feet." She tilted her head to look at me, and the teardrop mole at the end of her eye flickered in the firelight. "Evan, what do you think will happen when gasoline meets Mars?" "I understand." Rainwater was still pouring into the house, and the oil stains had already spread to within half a meter of Tanya's feet. The flames that had just been extinguished were hidden under the broken wooden boards, and were now licking the wet sawdust to survive, as long as Leah's bullets spark. Tanya suddenly looked up. Her pupils shrank to pinpoints. A stress response I learned in FBI profiling class. She realized she was a sitting duck. Victor's bodyguards had already started moving to the left, and Barney's men were also adjusting the angle of their guns. Their Adam's apples were moving, like a group of sharks smelling blood. "Roadblock!" I yelled to Leah, bent down, grabbed a nailed board and threw it toward the right window. "Block the left side with the shelf." "Victor, have your men knock open the fire hydrant." Leah's gun went off. Instead of hitting the oil stain, he smashed the light bulb above Tanya's head. When the glass fragments fell on my head, she had already dragged me towards the abandoned pipe in the corner. The metal pipe hit my lower back, and it hurt so much that I almost bit my tongue. But I heard the roar of heavy objects collapsing behind me. Victor's bodyguards knocked over the shelves, and those old file bags that had been piled up for 10 years fell down like paper rain, just blocking the view of the henchman on the right. "This way." Barney's shotgun made a dull sound, and a guy with a Glock was blasted against the wall, and blood splattered on the faded banner of outstanding citizen of Grey Harbor Town. His accomplices rushed over here cursing, but the nail boards I had placed in advance pierced the soles of their shoes, and they fell howling into a pothole filled with rainwater. In the melee, I caught a glimpse of Tanya crouching and running toward the back door. She stuffed the recorder into the secret pocket on her chest, and she moved so quickly that her gold necklace got caught on her collar. The opportunity came. I wiped the rain off my face, grabbed a broken brick, and smashed it at the gas meter on the left. With a bang, the pressure gauge needle jumped wildly, and several minions subconsciously covered their ears, just in time to make way for me. "Evan," Leah yelled, but I didn't look back. Tanya's high heels made rapid clicking sounds on the broken glass. I could hear her breathing and see the light pink scar on the back of her neck. Exactly the same location as the experimental subjects in the laboratory files. The forces behind her really didn't intend to leave anyone alive, so she was so anxious to grab the recorder. So anxious, she turned around just as I pounced on her. We bumped into the rusty water pipes, the twisted scream of metal mixed with her curses. Her nails dug into my wrists like razor blades, but I was more concerned about the heat from her chest. The recorder was right there, separated by 2 layers of cloth so hot it almost burned through my palms. "Let go." She pushed her knee against my lower abdomen. I groaned, but held her wrist tightly. The rain dripped into my eyes through the ends of her hair, blurring my vision. I could only reach the bulging pocket by feel. Just as his fingertips were about to touch the metal shell, the entire room suddenly fell into darkness. "It's Leah." She must have taken advantage of the chaos to get hold of the switch. In the darkness, the gunshots stopped suddenly, leaving only the sound of rain hitting the roof, and the hiss of a gas leak somewhere. Tanya's breath on my face smelled of bitter almonds, the residue of some sedative. Her fingers were still digging at my wrist, but her strength suddenly weakened and I could feel her moving to the side, trying to lead me towards the gas pipe. "Don't waste your energy." I pulled her hair down, and finally grabbed the edge of the recorder with my other hand. "The person behind you won't want a cripple." "Cripple?" She suddenly laughed, her warm breath brushing my earlobe. "Do you think they want the recorder?" In the dark, her nails suddenly pierced into the loose skin on the back of my neck, where the whisper of the dead came from. It hurt so much that I almost let go of her hand. "They want you, Evan Hastings." your temporal lobe, your memory. There was a dull thud of a heavy object falling to the ground. Tanya's strength suddenly disappeared, and she went limp in my arms. I felt a lump on the back of her neck, the mark of the stun gun. Leah's footsteps came from the left, with a familiar minty smell. Did you get it? Got it. I put the recorder into my arms. The moment it touched the pocket watch, the pain in the back of my neck suddenly turned into a burning sensation. In the darkness there was a sound of glass breaking, as if something was awakened. Leah pressed her hand on my back. Her gun was already loaded, but this time the muzzle was not pointed outward, but at Evan. Her voice was so soft it was a sigh. Did you hear that? I heard it. Amid the sound of rain and the hiss of the gas leak, there was a wet, sticky sound crawling along the corner of the wall. Those weren't the sound of human footsteps, but rather, the hands of the pocket watch suddenly moved backwards faster. I could hear my teeth chattering, not because of the cold, but because the sound was so familiar. Exactly the same sound coming from under the attic floor on that stormy night, 20 years ago. Tanya, in my arms, suddenly twitched. The electric shock marks on the back of her neck were still hot, but her fingers had already pinched the artery in my wrist. The metal shell of the recorder hurt my ribs, and then I realized that the muffled sound just now was not her fainting, but her deliberate show of weakness. Do you think you can steal it? Her breath sprayed on my earlobe with a smell of rust. Mr. Hastings, the fragments in your temporal lobe are much more valuable than this broken machine. There was a crisp sound of breaking glass in the darkness. Leah's flashlight fell. The sound of rain mixed with the distant sirens penetrated my ears. I could hear Barney yelling, "Don't let them get away," and Victor's cane tapping the ground slowly, as if he was counting down. Tanya's nails dug into my palm. I held her wrist bone with my backhand, and felt a raised scar on the inside of her wrist. The shape was exactly the same as the bite mark on the wrist of the victim in the family murder case 20 years ago. Let go. I pulled the recorder closer to my arms, and her knee hit my stomach hard. At this moment, the cold and hard feeling of metal suddenly touched my palm. It was the fire axe in the corner, left behind by someone. I picked up the axe handle and smashed it to the ground. With a clang, the echo hit the ceiling. Leah's mint scent immediately came from the left, and the barrel of the gun was against Tanya's neck. That's enough. Leah's voice was like ice. If you move again, your brain will explode. Tanya suddenly laughed, and warm liquid dripped onto the back of my hand. She bit her tongue. The passage, her blood mixed with her voice, seeped into my fingers. The answer you want is underground. Before she finished her words, her body suddenly went limp like mud. Only then did I realize that her heel was stuck in the crack of the floor, and the struggle just now caused the stone slab to shift half a finger. I squatted down and my fingertips touched the moss in the cracks of the stone. The damp touch made the burning sensation on the back of my neck even worse. It was exactly the same mold I felt when I was hiding under the attic floor on a rainy night, 20 years ago. Evan? Leah put her hand on my shoulder. What's wrong? The stone slab can move. I pushed hard, and the stone slab made a harsh friction sound, revealing a dark entrance. The smell of mold and rotten rot poured out, and the sound of dripping water came from below. Tick, tick, tick. Exactly the same rhythm as the leaking attic ceiling in my memory. Tanya suddenly turned over and rolled into the cave, and the hem of her black skirt brushed the back of my hand. Leah's gun clicked into place, and I held her back. She's trying to lead us down. That's perfect. Leah thrust the tactical flashlight into my hand. The beam swept across the cave entrance, and I could see the stone steps leading down. Whatever wasn't burned clean by the fire 20 years ago, we'll dig it out today. Victor's cane stopped behind him. Mr. Hastings, he said in a voice soaked in honey, there are no eyes down there. I didn't look back. Walking down the stone steps, we could hear Barney's heavy breathing with every step. He was only 2 steps away from us. The stone steps suddenly became narrow at the 7th step, and I could only pass sideways. Leah's shoulder brushed against my chest, and I smelled the mint scent on her neck, mixed with the smell of gunpowder. Who had she just exchanged fire with outside? The passage turned a corner 10 meters away, and Tanya's shadow suddenly stuck to the wall. The flashlight swept across her face, and I saw her pupils shrink to needle points. She was looking behind me. "Lower your head." Leah pounced on me and knocked me into the wall. The spikes rubbed the back of my neck and pierced into the stone wall. The sound of metal friction hurt my eardrums. Tanya's laughter floated from the front. "Welcome to the dollhouse, great detective." The secret compartment in the stone wall was still spewing out sharp spikes. I counted the rhythm, 1 group every 3 seconds, 7 in each group. Leah dragged me into a recessed alcove, where the beam of light swept across the base of the spikes, where crooked symbols were carved, exactly the same devil's mark I had drawn in my childhood diary. At that time I always dreamed that there was something under the attic floor, scratching these symbols in the wood with its claws. Is this Masonic code? Leah's fingers traced over the symbol. No, the strokes are like the EEG pattern of an epileptic patient. I took out my pocket watch. The hands were spinning so fast that they were blurry. The metal case was so hot that it left a red mark. Tanya's lab data mentioned abnormal discharge patterns in patients with temporal lobe epilepsy. I put the pocket watch on the symbol, and the engraving on the cover just fit into the indentation. She used the patient's brainwaves as a code. The spikes suddenly stopped. The stone wall made a click sound, and the passage extended forward. Leah dragged me along as I ran, Barney swearing behind me, and Victor's cane clattered slowly. At the end of the passage was a stone door, 2 heads taller than me, with its surface engraved with swirling patterns, and a crystal embedded in the middle, emitting a faint blue light. Tanya stood in front of the stone door, holding a recorder in her hand. "Want to know what your mother said before she died?" She pressed the play button, and a woman's scream came from the noise of electricity. "Don't let them dig up Evan's brain." That's... The pocket watch broke apart with a snap, and the gears burst out and stabbed into the back of my hand. The stone gate suddenly shook, and the blue light in the crystal turned blood red. I heard the sounds of that stormy night 20 years ago, wet and sticky, like something crawling under the slabs, the sound of nails scraping against stone, overlapping with the movement under the attic floor in my memory. Leah pointed her gun at the stone gate, the barrel trembling. "Evan, these patterns, it's a brain convolution." I touched the stone pattern, and as soon as my fingertips touched it, the stone door made a muffled sound, as if something was awakened. Tanya smiled and retreated into the crevice. The stone door began to close. I rushed over and grabbed her ankles. She threw down the recorder, and the metal shell fell at my feet. I heard my childhood cry from inside. "Mom, there's a monster under the floor." The stone door slammed shut with a bang. In the darkness, Leah's flashlight swept across the stone door, and I saw a faint palm print deep in the stone pattern, exactly the same size as my hand pressing on the stone surface. The fragments of the pocket watch were still stuck in the back of his hand, and blood dripped onto the stone pattern, as if dripping into the veins of a living thing. There was a creeping sound coming from inside the stone gate, louder and closer than 20 years ago. "Evan?" Leah's voice was trembling. "Did you hear that?" I heard it. That thing finally woke up. The flashlight cast a vague white light on the stone door, and Leah's breathing was right next to my ear, with a slight damp tremor. The wound on the back of my hand was still bleeding, and the place where the pocket watch fragments pierced my skin was burning with pain. Blood was dripping from between my fingers onto the stone pattern, as if it was dripping into the blood vessels of some living thing. The red color just now really seemed to be breathing.
"Evan?" Leah's flashlight suddenly focused on the lower left corner of the stone door. "There's a mark here."
I moved closer. There are several hair-thin scratches embedded in the stone veins, which are crooked and looked like they were scratched out with fingernails. My temple jumped. The pattern was exactly the same as the claw marks of the monster under the floor. I drew in my childhood diary. I was 7 years old that year. I hid under the bed in the attic and heard the sound of nails scratching under the wooden beams. I traced half a page on the notebook in the moonlight, which was later torn up by my mother and thrown into the fireplace. It's Morse code. Leah took out a pen and wrote it down quickly on her palm. Short, long, short. If it corresponds to the letter, it should be. I stared at the blue light in the stone veins. It was blood red just now, and now it had faded to a dark blue. The recorder that Tanya dropped before leaving was still at her feet, with a dent on the metal casing. I squatted down to pick it up and pressed the switch. My own cry suddenly rang out amid the noise of electricity. "Mom, there's a monster under the floor." Then there was the sound of heavy objects being dragged, glass breaking, and a man's chuckle. "Little profiler, remember this sound. When you grow up, you will use it to solve all the mysteries." That was Victor Marlowe's voice. He knew I would come back, 20 years ago. I gripped the recorder so tightly that my knuckles turned white. The fragments of the pocket watch left deeper blood marks on the palm of his hand. Suddenly the blue light in the stone veins began to flicker regularly. 3 long and 2 short. 3 long and 2 short. Exactly the same rhythm as the blood oozing from the wound on the back of my hand. Leah's flashlight shone across the back of my hand. "Evan, your blood." The shape of the blood drops spreading on the stone pattern perfectly coincides with the brain convolution pattern in the stone pattern. I suddenly remembered the brain scan report Tanya gave me last week. She stared at the abnormal wrinkles in the temporal lobe and said, "Your brain is structured like some kind of ancient code book. The gyri correspond to brain areas." I pressed the most raised line in the stone. The parietal lobe is responsible for spatial perception, and the temporal lobe is responsible for memory. Blood flowed through my fingers into the concave part of the stone. The stone door suddenly made a muffled sound similar to a heartbeat. "Stand back." Leah grabbed my arm and moved to the side. A row of metal spikes popped out from the cracks in the rocks, brushed past my shoulder and pierced into the stone wall. They have already set up a mechanism in the stone door. I wiped the cold sweat from my face and glanced at Victor and Barney huddled in the shadows. Barney's hands were in his trouser pockets shaped like he was holding a gun. Victor adjusted his cufflinks with a smile on his face, as if he was watching a carefully choreographed play. "Mr. Hastings," Victor began, his voice as sweet as if it were dipped in honey. "Are you sure you want to open this door? There are some secrets that even the FBI can't bear." Barney's gun was already pressed against the back of Leah's neck. "Hand over the code, or the sheriff's brains will splatter on your newly polished shoes." I stared at Barney's trembling fingers. His father was the police officer at the scene of the murder 20 years ago. There was an old photo in the file, showing his father and Victor shaking hands at the door of the police station, and a cardboard box containing evidence could be seen in the background. It turns out that what he was shielding was not the rich and powerful, but the sins of his father. "Do you want to know what your father hid back then?" I stared at Barney's red eyes. Behind the stone door is his confession letter, sandwiched between Victor's love letters to his deceased wife. Barney's gun shook even more violently. Leah took the opportunity to grab his wrist with her backhand and pushed her knee into his lower back. I lunged at Victor, and his cufflinks suddenly ejected thin blades, cutting open the clothes on my left arm. Blood splashed on the stone gate, and the blue light instantly surged into a dazzling white light. "The password is blood," I shouted and grabbed the palm print on the stone door, the indentation that matched my palm exactly. The fragments of the pocket watch were still stuck in the back of his hand, and blood flowed along the lines of his palm into the stone. The roar of gears turning came from deep within the stone gate. No, Victor rushed over, but was hit on the temple by Leah with a flashlight and fell to the ground. Barney was still struggling and was handcuffed to a stone pillar by Leah. The stone door cracked open with a bang, and cold white light poured out. Inside is a laboratory. The wall was embedded with transparent culture chambers, inside which pale human bodies floated, with liquid of the same color as the blue light of the stone gate flowing in their blood vessels. Tanya stood in the center. She took off her white coat, revealing the same black totem on her collarbone as Leah's, the mark of a family of serial killers. "Welcome to the future, Evan." Tanya's voice was like a snake's tongue. "What you cracked was not the stone door, but the ticket I gave you." Behind her, 6 men in gas masks emerged. The black holes of their submachine guns pointed at us. The display screen in the corner of the laboratory suddenly lit up, and the picture showed the central square of Huigang Town, where the stage for tomorrow's Harvest Festival was being set up. The camera zoomed in and I saw blue wires wrapped around the stage pillars, the same pattern as the stone on the stone gate. The small town's carnival deserves a more memorable ending. Tanya pressed the remote control, and the time on the display began to count down. Leah's fingers moved gently in my palm. She was asking me if there was any solution. I stared at the bodies in the incubators. They all had the same temporal folds on their temples as I did. The fragments of the pocket watch are still accelerating my aging. The wound on the back of my hand has begun to scab over, but I can hear the whisper of the dead more clearly. Those people floating in the incubator are shouting the same name before they die. Victor Marlowe. Tanya's laughter mixed with the ticking sound of the countdown echoed in the laboratory. I counted the gunmen surrounding us. 6, and the third had a dent on the butt of his rifle, matching the characteristics of the weapon used by the robbers in the convenience store robbery last week. It turns out that the so-called criminal network was just Tanya's experiment. When the countdown reached 01550, Leah suddenly stepped on my instep. This was the code word we agreed upon for having a plan. Her eyes swept across the fire extinguisher in the corner, and quickly moved to the laptop next to Tanya. I took out the remains of the pocket watch from my pocket, and the sharp edge of the gears left a red mark on my palm. "You think you can stop me?" Tanya held up a syringe filled with the same color liquid as the one in the incubator. "Look at these people. Their brains can receive the memories of the dead. And you, Evan, are the perfect container. When the fireworks of the Harvest Festival rise, the dead in Grey Harbor will wake up collectively and use their memories to drown the living." The square on the display suddenly flashed a blue light as if some signal was activated. The countdown jumped to Z150 zeroed in, and I heard synchronized sighs from the human bodies in the incubator. Leah's hand quietly grasped the handle of the fire extinguisher, and I clenched the gears of the pocket watch. The blood from the wound dripped onto the ground, and the shape of the blood was exactly the same as the palm print of Shimin. Tanya's smile froze on her face. The gunmen behind her suddenly turned their heads and stared at the bloodstains at my feet. One of them took off his mask. It was the convenience store clerk who disappeared last week. There was no white in his eyes, only the same dark blue as Shimin. They are listening to you." Leah's voice was very low. Only then did I realize that the bodies in the incubator and the gunmen were silently repeating what I had just said. The memories of the dead should be guarded by the living. The red light of the countdown reflected on Tanya's face, and she finally panicked. I loosened my grip, and the gears of the pocket watch fell to the ground with a clang. As the stone door closed behind us, I heard the thunder of that stormy night 20 years ago, mixed with the clearer whispers of countless dead people. They were saying, "Evan, it's time to wake up." Tanya's men began to tear each other apart, and the glass of the incubator shattered one after another. Leah dragged me toward the laptop, and I saw the countdown on the monitor jump to 0145. The wires of the square stage were oozing blue light, and in the center of all the chaos, Tanya's hand was shaking as she held the syringe. In the shadows behind her, a figure was walking out of the darkness. It was Victor. He wiped the blood off his face and smiled like the man who stood outside my attic on that rainy night 20 years ago. My little profiler, his voice mixed with the whispers of the dead, booming in the laboratory. Welcome to the truth. As the countdown ticked, I saw Leah hit the enter key on her laptop. Amid the roar of the stone door closing, I heard a cry of surprise from the real-time picture of the square. Someone had discovered the wires on the stage pillars, but that's not enough. Tanya screamed and rushed to the console, but Victor suddenly grabbed her neck. Leah and I looked at each other and rushed in different directions at the same time. The fragments of the pocket watch were still aging rapidly, and my knees began to tremble. But the whispers of the dead were becoming clearer and clearer. They were telling me, there is still time. As I grabbed the last switch on the console, the countdown on the display suddenly turned red. In the picture of the square, several police officers were approaching the wires with bomb disposal pliers. Tanya struggled in Victor's arms. He leaned over to her ear and said something. Her pupils instantly dilated and turned blue. Evan. Leah's scream was filled with blood. Her arm was scratched by the rebounding glass fragments. I rushed over and hugged her, and saw Victor pick up Tanya and walk towards the secret door deep in the laboratory. The game has just begun. When he turned around, the smile on his face was exactly the same as the one in his memory of that rainy night. Next time we meet, I will show you what the real whisper of the dead is. The secret door closed behind him, and the alarm in the incubator hurt his eardrums. Leah's blood dripped onto the back of my hand, mixed with my blood, and dripped onto the bloodstains on the ground. The controlled gunmen suddenly knelt down and lowered their heads to us. The countdown on the display screen jumped to 0130 zone, and the police officers in the square had cut the first wire. But I know this is just the beginning. There are more secrets hidden behind Victor's secret door. In Tanya's experiment, there are more containers like mine. And the monster that crawled into my attic on a rainy night 20 years ago is now slowly waking up with the whispers of the dead. Leah held my shaking hands and entered the bomb disposal code into the console. The alarm suddenly turned into a long beep, and the countdown on the display began to jump wildly. I stared at the place where the secret door was closed. The stone patterns there slowly emitted the same blue light as the stone door, the same color as the wound on the back of my hand. Did we win? Leah's voice was a little weak. I took out the recorder from my pocket, which still contained the sound of my childhood crying. Now there is another voice in the crying, very soft but clear. It is the whispers of the victims of the murder case 20 years ago. They are saying, "Be careful, he is behind you." All the lights in the laboratory suddenly went out. In the darkness I heard the sound of fingernails scratching stone from the direction of the secret door, exactly the same sound as the one I heard under the floorboards of the attic in my childhood. When the emergency light in the laboratory exploded into a dim yellow spot in the darkness, I was holding Leah's wrist and moving towards the ventilation duct. The sound of nails scratching stone was so close, as if someone was breathing on the back of my neck. Exactly the same as it was in the attic on a rainy night in 1993, when I curled up behind an old wooden box, heard the same sound coming from under the floor, and then saw blood oozing out of the cracks, like red earthworms crawling over my bare feet. Hands up. The beams of powerful flashlights were coming down on us, and at least 7 guns were pointed at us. I squinted and made out the uniforms. Not town police, but Victor's personal security, with the fleur-de-lis logo of his charitable foundation embroidered on the shoulder straps. But now their collar buttons were all undone, revealing the bluish-gray tattoos on their collarbones, like some twisted tree-shaped veins. Tanya Cole walked out from the shadows, the hem of her white coat stained with dark red blood. She tapped the display screen on the wall with her fingers, and the countdown that had been jumping wildly just now suddenly stopped, replaced by a real-time picture of the central square of Grey Harbor Town. Town celebration parade. 3 p.m. Her voice was like crushed ice. 300 children holding paper flowers will walk in the front. Guess which row my gift will explode. The screen switched images, and I saw a black lump protruding from the base of the fountain in the square. the same color as the blue light seeping from the secret door of the laboratory. Leah dug her nails into the back of my hand. Those are the new landscape lights Victor helped install. I checked the wiring last week. Victor was pressed against the operating table, his gold-rimmed glasses tilted on the tip of his nose. His usually neatly combed silver hair was a mess, and when he saw me he suddenly struggled and shouted, "Evan, I had the control chips of those lights replaced, but Tanya said she just wanted to create a little chaos." His throat rolled. "My wife's memory is stored in the server. She needs a power source. I just want—" "Shut up, old man." The security guard who had a gun against the back of his neck hit him on the temple with the butt of the gun, and Victor's forehead immediately swelled up and bruised. Detective Barney was tied up in the corner with his hands behind his back. The second button of his police uniform had fallen off, revealing the faded police badge on his chest. It was a gift from his father when he retired. He stared at me, his lips trembling. "Don't believe what Tanya said. I burned half of the files on the murder case, but the rest, enough." Tanya clapped her hands, and the security guards froze in an instant. Only then did I realize that their pupils were glowing an eerie blue, the same color as the light seeping from the cracks in the rocks. Leah whispered in my ear, "It's a nerve control drug. It's the same symptoms as the victims of the previous shootings." The back of my hand suddenly burned. Looking down, I saw that the wound caused by the stone shards was emitting blue light, as if there was a living thing crawling under the skin. This is the side effect of Whisper of the Dead, starting to take effect. Every time I use my ability, my cells divide faster. After reading the serial killer's memory last time, half of my hair turned white, but at this moment the wounds of the controlled security guards also had the same blue light, like some kind of symbiote. "Thinking about your superpowers," Tanya walked up to me and ran her fingertips over the light marks on the back of my hand. "Do you think it's a talent?" "No, Evan, you are the perfect vessel. On that stormy night 20 years ago, they put the experimental subject into your attic, and you inhaled its spores, so you can hear the dead speak and become its host." She suddenly laughed. "It's a pity that you are too weak, and every time you use your ability, you are consuming your life. But it doesn't matter. When the town celebration explosion causes panic, the spores will spread with the smell of blood, and the entire Grey Harbor town will become a container." Leah's gun felt hot in my palm. We huddled back to back between two freezers, her breath brushing my earlobe. The third one on the left is a high-pressure nitrogen tank, and the valve is loose. I nodded and rubbed her wrist with my thumb. This was the code we used during FBI special training, meaning I know. Tanya was still saying something, but I couldn't hear it clearly. My attention was focused on the security guard holding the MP5, his holster unfastened and the spare magazine dangling. More importantly, there was a fresh knife wound on his temple, and the blood had not yet coagulated. The memory of the deceased in the last 30 seconds before death was enough for me to know their weaknesses. "Dead, tell me." I closed my eyes, and the blue light from the wound suddenly surged. A sharp pain shot from the back of my neck to my spine, as if someone was poking my bone marrow with a red-hot wire. Fragments of memory came flooding in. In the damp basement, men in white coats pushed blue liquid into his veins. He fell down shouting, "Mom," and when he opened his eyes again, he was standing here, following Tanya's instructions. The most crucial thing is that their nerve center is controlled at the third cervical vertebra, where there is a raised blue nodule that will collapse with one hit. "Do it," I growled. Leah's boot heel accurately kicked the valve of the nitrogen tank, and the whistling sound of the high-pressure gas gushing out drowned out the alarm. I lunged at the stabbed security guard, crushing his Adam's apple with my elbow, and yanked the magazine out as he stumbled. He reached out to grab me, but I grabbed the back of his neck with my backhand and pressed my thumb hard on the blue nodule. His pupils instantly dilated and he collapsed like a puppet with its strings pulled. The laboratory was in chaos. Leah picked up the fire extinguisher, and smashed it at the surveillance camera. Glass fragments splashed on her face, leaving tiny drops of blood. Victor took the opportunity to knock over the operating table, and the petri dishes shattered all over the floor. The blue liquid spread on the ground and crawled onto the soles of the security guard's boots, like a living thing. Barney bit the rope with his teeth, picked up a chair, and smashed it against the control box. Sparks flew around Tanya's feet. She screamed and stepped back, with a hole burned in the hem of her white coat. As I grabbed the second gun, I was shot in the shoulder. The bullet grazed my collarbone, and the burning pain made me more awake. Leah gestured to me from 5 meters away. 3 security guards were blocking the door, and 2 were guarding the control console. I nodded and fired 2 shots at the ventilation duct. Metal fragments fell like raindrops, and the security guards instinctively looked up, and Leah's gun was already against the back of the neck of the nearest one. Go. She dragged me towards the control console. The town celebration images on the display were still flashing. I saw that the parade had reached the fountain, and the children's laughter pierced my ears through the speakers. There were 7 buttons on the console, red, green, and yellow. Just as I was about to press one, Leah grabbed my hand. Wait a minute. She pointed to the scratches under the buttons, exactly the same as the pattern on the stone of the secret door. It's misleading. I remembered Tanya's sneer just now. The real control device is behind the secret door. I don't know when the secret door opened a crack, and the blue light in the stone veins flickered like breathing. I kicked away the security guard who was blocking the way, and Leah led the way with a gun in hand. Behind the door was a stone staircase leading down, and on the wall hung old photos from 20 years ago. Researchers in white coats, a woman holding a baby. Was that my mother? And the monster, curled up in the iron cage, its skin glowing blue, and its fingertips covered with sharp nails. At the end of the stairs was a secret room. On the metal table in the middle was a glass jar with a human brain in it, and blood vessels were connected to countless wires. Next to it was a note, pressed under my childhood toy train. It was a gift from my father on my 7th birthday, and later disappeared in a family murder case. The words on the note were written in blood and had turned black. Old Shipyard Warehouse B7. Password. The date is the day my family was murdered. Evan. Leah yelled behind her. They're coming. I stuffed the note into my inner pocket and knocked over the metal table as I turned. The glass jar fell to the ground. The human brain split in half, and blue spores poured out like a group of glowing fireflies. Tanya screamed from the steps. Don't touch it. That is. Leah dragged me into another passage, and I heard the footsteps of the security guards behind me. As we ran through the laboratory corridor, I touched the note in the inner pocket. The code on it was uneven under my fingertips. 1993-0615. On that rainy night, all the secrets were to be revealed in the old shipyard warehouse B7. How many people are behind us? Leah asked as she ran. 7. I wiped the blood off my face, but 3 of their nodes were destroyed. The rest probably can't catch up. She suddenly stopped, turned around and kissed me. Very light, with the salty taste of blood. If we get separated later, she said, pressing the gun between us to my chest. Go to the old shipyard and don't look back. The alarm was still blaring, and the blue light cast our overlapping shadows on the corridor wall. Behind me I heard the sound of fingernails scratching stone. Exactly the same sound as in the attic of my childhood. Very, very close. But this time I wasn't scared. When we broke open the laboratory door, the midday sun was so blinding. In the distance came the music of the town celebration parade, and the children's laughter sounded like silver bells. I touched the note in my inner pocket, and the address of the old shipyard felt hot in my palm. There were the answers I was looking for, and perhaps also the ending I had to face. Run. Leah pushed me. Our shadows were stretched out, like 2 knives pointing to the sky. Tanya's scream was heard from behind, and footsteps were getting closer and closer. But now, I hear only the whispers of the dead, saying, "Don't be afraid, child. You are stronger than you think." And in the direction of the old shipyard, something woke up. The treasure house is about to close, but the next puzzle is waiting. If it moves you, please gently like, subscribe, and pass on this piece. Sleep well, dear wanderer.